Hi everyone. You're listening to the Demon Consort's Cultivation Manual. A story of love, power, and a fate that spans across time. If you enjoy this story, please hit like and subscribe to support the channel. Now, let's see what happens next. Chapter 7. Van Dyne's deep, inscrutable gaze looked back, but I quickly regained my composure. If he didn't suspect, that would be truly unacceptable. I asked him, "Has your highness ever been to the music bureau?" He silently looked at me. I then asked him, "Does your highness know what kind of plight female family members of officials, who are not conscripted into the music registry, face at the music bureau?" Finally, there was a slight flicker in his eyes. I slowly smiled. After a traitor commits treason, anyone could kill. Shuiji had just entered the music bureau when she reached the age of maturity. A servant of the music bureau saw my beauty, and even he dared to humiliate me. I spread my two hands, white as jade porcelain, out under the faint sunlight. Upon them bloodstains had once clung. I used these very hands to push him down a 100-step-high platform. His skull was crushed, blood flowed profusely. Truly, death wouldn't atone for his sins. Before, these hands once played the zither, painted, embroidered, and played chess. Afterwards, they held a blade, gouged out eyes, stabbed hearts. Having gone through such things, that Su Incher then became the courtesan Shuiji. Just a weak maidservant, that's all. Kill me if you want to, what's so hard about that? I smiled as I looked at him, revealing layer after layer of the true face of a cold and ruthless Tengamboi, who kills people like stepping on ants, for him to see. The line between truth and falsehood, even I myself found it hard to distinguish. Sunlight pierced through the dappled leaves and shone down, making the crimson mole on my cheek appear exquisitely beautiful. Is a face capable of toppling kingdoms and cities, with such a tragic and miserable background, enough to dispel your suspicions? Is it enough to make you feel remorse and pity, Crown Prince Van Dyne? He slowly bent down, the sunlight shining on him as clear as water. He used those eyes, untouched by the dust of the mortal world, to look at me, crawling out of the muddy puddle, and asked me, "Tengamboi, does it hurt?" Van Dyne flicked his sleeves and left. The early summer sunlight shone on me, yet it brought no warmth at all. I knelt in place, not knowing what Van Dyne meant by those words. But he finally believed that I was Tengamboi, and that was enough. The 17th day of the 5th month should have been the day the entire nation celebrated the noble consort's Thursday festival. The personal name of imperial concubine Wang was Tichu. Therefore, previously, the emperor had ordered the Ministry of Works to construct the Jiaoxi terrace by the shore of Lake Tai. Taking the meaning morning and evening, I composed poetry for her, to celebrate the imperial concubine's Thursday festival. The Jiaoxi terrace had been completed 5 days before the birthday banquet, only waiting for the emperor and the imperial concubine to ascend the terrace and bestow the plaque on the birthday, upon which the grand project would be officially declared complete. However, on the eve of the imperial concubine's Thursday banquet, the high terrace, which represented the profound love between the emperor and the imperial concubine, collapsed. Glazed tiles shattered, dust flew for 1,000 li, a terrifying sight to behold. The emperor was enraged and ordered the Department of Investigation to investigate. Han Jiwei, the vice minister of the Ministry of Works, was the one who bore the brunt of it. Through investigation, it was revealed that when Han Jiwei was supervising the construction of the Jiaoxi terrace, he had engaged in corruption and accepted bribes, neglected his duties, condoned malfeasance, and implicitly allowed the workers to replace good materials with inferior ones, causing the foundation of the Jiaoxi terrace to be unstable, resulting in it only having outward splendor and ultimately leading to its collapse. Han Jiwei was dismissed from his post and imprisoned. Just then, the Imperial Astronomical Bureau submitted a memorial stating that a comet had encroached upon the Big Dipper, the heavens had sent down an ill omen, and that no earth or wood construction should be rashly undertaken. The Imperial Censor also presented a memorial, stating that the Jiaoxi terrace depleted the people's strength and wasted money, and bluntly admonished the emperor not to defy counsel, undertake massive construction, and engage in wasteful extravagance for a woman, as this was truly not the action of an enlightened monarch. The collapse of the Chaushi Terrace, though due to human actions, was also partly due to divine punishment. The emperor was assailed by the remonstrating officials with their spittle, angrily adjourned the court, and the Guefe was also neglected because of this. This time, not only did the Chaushi Terrace collapse, but even the Guefe's Thousand Autumns banquet was downgraded to an ordinary family banquet, and everyone harbored their own private thoughts, dispersing unhappily. I held an umbrella, threaded through the curtain of summer night rain to Shinsi Palace where the crown prince usually read, but did not find him. A eunuch reported to me that the crown prince had returned to his bedchamber. I hesitated for a moment, but still decided to go to Hanzhong Palace. Outside the palace, I met Muqi. He originally intended to stop me, but I cast my gaze towards Jiaolong Palace, which made him so angry that he gnashed his teeth and yielded the way. Ever since accidentally learning the secret of Jiaolong Palace, as long as Muqi dared to confront me, I would go before the crown princess to accuse him. After several such instances, he now treats me with a certain degree of courtesy. When I saw Yun Yan at Hamzhong Palace, he was drinking alone, facing the dark of night. Outside the window, the rain pattered, the lamplight in Hamzhong Palace was dim, and he, dressed in white, sat before the window. This scene appeared somewhat desolate. He was the victor, and by all rights, he should not have been so dejected. Han Jiwei's corruption and dereliction of duty indeed led to the collapse of the Jiaoshi Terrace, but its collapse right on the eve of the noble consort's birthday banquet. This timing was personally orchestrated by Yun Yan. I thought, from the moment the emperor ordered the construction of the Jiaoshi Terrace, he had already begun to plot today's gambit. From the perspective of the grand scheme, he did this to eliminate Han Jiwei, restore real power to Cui Lang, and reclaim the Ministry of Works. The Cui and Nan clans had long been generational friends. Cui Lang, Minister of Works, was in the same imperial examination cohort as Grand Tutor Nan Zhe. Both had their names listed in the top 3 ranks of the imperial examination, and their bond was deep and profound. After the Nan clan plotted rebellion, most of their former associates and protégés were implicated. The Cui clan of Qinghe, being a family of high officials for many generations, naturally could not be shaken, yet even though they were not demoted, banished, or disgraced, they still lost the emperor's trust. From then on, Cui Lang feigned illness and retired from court, and the Ministry of Works was taken over by Vice Minister Han Jiwei. The Han clan was the maternal clan of the second prince, Yun Ju, and just like the fifth prince, Yun Ji, they all coveted the position of crown prince. When the Jiaoshi Terrace collapsed, Han Jiwei was arrested and imprisoned. At this time, Cui Lang, Minister of Works, appeared to preside over the overall situation, and his handling of the aftermath affairs could be said to have won the people's hearts. As for the personal aspect, how could the crown prince stand by idly and watch imperial noble consort Wang, the one who had caused the death of the late Empress Xie Ziyun, ascend the Jiaoshi Terrace with the emperor? Only the empress had the qualification to receive the blessings of the myriad people and be referred to as an inseparable couple with the emperor. How dare a small swallow occupy the phoenix's nest? When Van Dien saw me arrive, he seemed a little surprised. Although nominally I was his beloved consort, I had never set foot in his private chambers. I and his other consorts in the palace were all merely consorts in name only. I knelt down beside him, bowed my head before his knees, and said, "Your Highness has not visited Kui Tuet Pavilion for a long time, your concubine misses your Highness." Van Dien's hand, which was holding a wine cup, paused, then he placed the porcelain cup on the small table, raised his hand and stroked my long hair. I stood up and poured him a cup of light wine, then smilingly asked, "Your Highness, why are you drinking alone until you are drunk?" I didn't know how long he had been sitting there. Even his temples were damp with dew. He looked at the desolate night rain outside the window, remained silent for a long time, then slowly poured the wine from the cup in his hand onto the gr. And said, "I pour wine to mourn an old friend." Chapter 8. Pouring wine to mourn an old friend, to soothe the sorrow. What kind of old friend is this, that one can only, on a rainy and windy night like this, alone scatter wine as an offering? While alive, bore guilt after death, has no tombstone. He turned his head in the dim light, appraised me for a moment, then suddenly said, "Today you are wearing white. You are truly different compared to usual." Normally, I bore the title of demonic consort, so my clothes and makeup were all splendid and glamorous, but today I wore a white outfit, my cloud-like hair lightly coiled with a silver hairpin, the only ornament being the forbidden paste tassel jade pendant at my waist. It truly was different, and it was no wonder Yun Yan grew suspicious. I sat down beside him, poured for myself and drank. Your concubine has just returned from bathing in the jade bamboo pond. Please pardon your concubine's impropriety, Your Highness. It seemed Yun Yan had long been accustomed to my manner of saying one thing but meaning another, and such great disrespect. He just smiled and had no intention of blaming me. He was always so kind-hearted and magnanimous. Outside the window, the night rain pattered. He and I drank together across from each other in silence, each carrying our own private thoughts. This rain was persistent and prolonged. It had continuously fallen since the beginning of summer, truly heartbreakingly sad, even more gut-wrenching than drizzling rain of Qingming. Yun Yan mused. This year, the rain has come earlier than usual, and the rainfall is also heavier. Alas for the common people, worries are piling up even more. I thought Yun Yan was a good crown prince. If he were to become king, he would surely be an enlightened ruler who loved his people like his own children. It's a pity that things in this world do not always belong to those who are suitable for them, let alone this 9-5 supreme position. His wine made me thoroughly drunk, and I asked him, Your Highness, what kind of wine is this? It's even more delicious than the mulberry nectar wine from Luosi Pavilion. The wine in the cup was a deep blue-green. He looked at it for a long time. In his eyes, there seemed to be a rain even more persistent than the rain outside the window. His voice was a little hoarse, but gentler than usual. I have an old friend who likes to drink apricot blossom wine, so she personally brewed many jars and buried them under the tree. I stole her apricot blossom wine. Drinking the wine in a hurry, I almost shed tears. Yun Yan raised his hand and stroked my back. With tears welling in my eyes, I looked at him. You are inherently a person of grace. For Your Highness to act like this is truly impolite. The palace lamps flickered. Yun Yan slowly smiled, momentarily eclipsing all the lights in the room. He was so peerlessly handsome, yet his sorrow was truly heartbreaking, making people unable to bear looking at him. He said, If she finds out, she will definitely come looking for me to get it back, refusing to let it go. But I've waited so long, why hasn't she come yet? Master Jiao Lu told me that assassins do not deserve to have a heart. Because an assassin is merely a blade, how can a dead thing have a heart? But at this moment, I felt sorrow for him. I was like a playgoer who inadvertently stumbled into the joys, angers, loves, and hatreds of others. Tonight there was rain and wine, jade doors facing cherry blossoms. An old acquaintance had not arrived, but having a story was also good. Van Dine's voice, broken by the rain, was low and gentle, as if telling a distant, unattainable dream, floating in memories. The first time we met, she was sleeping on an apricot tree blooming profusely like clouds. The entire apricot tree was pure white like snow. I didn't see her, only wanting to pluck a branch of spring blossoms, yet inadvertently pulled her down. She, along with the scattering apricot blossoms, fell into my arms, causing the palace servants to be frightened. Perhaps the wine was too strong, which made me a little startled, as if the scene of their meeting appeared so clearly before my eyes. Holding my wine cup, I leaned over the low table, through the wafting incense smoke, looked at Van Dine's ink-like eyebrows, and laughed, saying Your Highness originally wanted to pluck a flower but accidentally tugged on that young lattice snow-white Taoist robe. The room became silent, the sound of rain fall. Outside the window grew even more distinct, drip by drip, like a frenzied heartbeat. In Van Dine's eyes, it seemed as if a wind swept through, scattering the subtle tenderness that was there, revealing powerful undercurrents buried deep beneath. He asked me, How do you know she wears a Taoist robe as white as snow? I met his gaze, which held a hidden undercurrent, and said with a smile, The Crown Princess once mentioned to me that Your Highness has a childhood sweetheart who is your heart's beloved, the legitimate daughter of the Nan clan, Nan Din Tuet. When she was young, her destiny was flawed, and she was once sent to be raised at a Taoist temple. I gripped the wine cup tightly and approached Van Dine. Actually, Your Highness doesn't know, Tuet Ko also once stayed at a Taoist temple. There are some stories that need to be exchanged with other stories to seem credible. Along with the ceaseless patter of falling rain, I told him my story, half true and half false, impossible to verify the story of Tingamboy. The year the mansion was confiscated, my father was imprisoned and beheaded, my mother used white silk to commit suicide, and my wet nurse, unable to bear seeing me fall into the Jiao Fuang division, risked her life to protect me as I fled. She was hit by an arrow, and before she died, she entrusted me to an old white-bearded Taoist. The old Taoist had a dilapidated, very secluded Taoist temple, and also took me in for a while. Then one day, the old Taoist woke me up in the middle of the night, saying he wanted to eat roasted sweet potatoes, and told me to go to the back mountain to dig sweet potatoes for him. The old Taoist was very poor, and we often went without food for several days straight. I looked at the sky, which was dark as ink, and felt that the old Taoist had mental issues. But I couldn't bear to see him suffer from hunger and cold, and although I greatly doubted whether there were actually any sweet potatoes on the back mountain, I still picked up the small hoe and went. Alas, living under someone else's roof, one cannot but humble oneself. Afterwards, at daybreak, I was captured and brought back by the government soldiers who searched the mountain, and ultimately still fell into the Jiaofeng division. I don't know how much of my old friend Yun Yan's Xinghua wine I drank, I only clearly remember that in the end, I resolutely stopped using a cup, hugging the wine jar and drinking until I was swaying precariously. I lay slumped on the dimly lit table, still holding the wine jar in my arms, and angrily cursed this old white-bearded man is truly wicked, how dare he deceive me. I slammed my fist onto the table, not knowing why a story I made up could make me cry so miserably. I incessantly asked, why did you deceive me, why must you deceive me, why does everyone deceive me? In my hazy, drunken eyes, I saw Yun Yan gently take my hand, which was clenched into a fist. In his eyes was an endless, dense ink-like color. He art his low voice, he said, I am guilty, I have wronged them, and I have wronged all of you. His handsome face gradually became blurred in the flickering lamplight. I wanted to tell him, the deceased cannot be brought back to life, in truth, neither I nor they ever blamed your highness. But I have no right to forgive him on behalf of Su Yinshi. Chapter 9. Waking up from sleep, I was in my own bed, outside the window, the rain still hadn't stopped. Yunji sent me a message, inquiring about the crown prince's next move. Of course, he didn't care about Han Jiwei's life or death, it was just that the collapse of Chaoshi platform was a great humiliation for noble consort Wen. Furthermore, the Imperial Astronomical Bureau and the Censorate had submitted memorials to remonstrate, and recently, the emperor had become somewhat indifferent towards the noble consort and the fifth prince Yunji. This was what scared him the most. Last night, I wore white to meet Yun Yan because I knew that day was the death anniversary of Lady Nan. For years ago on this very day, the pagoda tree flowers on both sides of the road in Xinjing were in full bloom, a strong wind blew in from the horizon, and the pagoda tree flowers danced and flew throughout the city like a torrential blizzard, covering even the Meridian Gate, where blood flowed like a river. A noble family of hundreds of generations was wiped out overnight. The emperor's wrath caused blood to flow like a river. Who would be next, no one knew. I stood up and got out of bed, looking at the incessant rain outside the window, suddenly remembering what Yun Yan had said yesterday. Everything between us might be half truth, half falsehood, but his sorrow was real, and his remorse was also real. But none of these matters concerned me. My goal had been achieved. I sent a reply message to Yunji. Frogs filling the kitchen. 3 days later, the crown prince submitted a memorial to the throne, stating that this summer there had been continuous and incessant rain, fearing that all the rivers would overflow, causing disaster for Jiangnan. Therefore, he requested to tour the prefectures of Jiangnan to reinforce the dikes and stabilize the people's livelihood. Coincidentally, the fifth prince Yunji also submitted a memorial on the same day, requesting to go inspect Jiangnan to prevent floods. The emperor immediately ordered the various prefectures and counties to reinforce the dikes, clear the waterways, and do well in flood prevention preparations. However, he had still not issued an imperial decree approving the memorials of the crown prince and Prince Yong. All the court officials clearly understood that this was the crown prince and Prince Yong competing, and His Majesty's intention lay in a single stroke of the brush. The swirling political turmoil in the imperial court caused people even more distress than this incessant torrential rain. The officials of the Eastern Palace were anxious and restless, but only the crown prince. Yun Yan remained calm and at ease, seemingly paying no attention to this matter. The 7th day of the 6th month was the birthday of the late Empress Xia Zhiyun. Every year on this day, Crown Prince Yun Yan would go to Hukwa Temple to keep vigil for his mother for one night, personally copy Buddhist scriptures, and express his profound longing. Early in the morning, I had already packed a small satchel, instructed Dai Dai to stay in Kui Tuet Pavilion and study tales of the Seductress thoroughly, and then, alone, holding an umbrella, I blocked Yun Yan's carriage. And when he saw me, the bronze mask on Mu Chi's face grew even colder. The book says that to be a seductress, one must flirt and entice the Lord, and as for those who stand in the way, treat them as dust, not even deigning to notice. Therefore, I completely ignored Mu Chi's detestable face, my wide sleeves gracefully swept as I made a delicate curtsy, and said, I am moved by your highness' filial piety, and I wish to accompany your highness to Hokwak Temple to keep vigil for the spirit, copying scriptures for Empress Xiaoxian. I request your highness' gracious permission. Through the swaying carriage curtain, Yun Yan's gaze, hidden in the veil of rain, revealed no clear expression. He seemed to let out a sigh, and finally said, get in the carriage. I gleefully got into the carriage with Yun Yan to go to Hokwak Temple. Hokwak Temple was built on Mount Cheongnam Bak Sun, in the outskirts of Xinjiang, specifically for tea. He Great Qi imperial family across generations to worship ancestral tablets and pray for the nation's fortune. The group arrived at Hokwak Temple at noon. Yun Yan went straight to fast and cleanse himself, preparing for tonight's task of copying scriptures and keeping vigil. Hokwak Temple is an imperial temple, with strict security. This time, Yun Yan traveled with only a contingent of personal guards, and even with Mu Chi, they weren't enough to make a dozen people. All followed Yun Yan closely, and no one paid attention to me. Around Hokwak Temple, many cherry blossom trees are planted. Their powder-pink petals in the hazy rain curtain are like colored clouds. Distant mountains emit smoke, and the incense smoke of chanting scriptures can also be considered a beautiful scene. I leisurely carried a plate of fish food, standing on the stone bridge to feed the fish. In front, 2 or 3 monks walked over. The one leading, though young, had a dignified Dharma appearance, a vermilion mole between his brows, and long eyelashes slightly drooped. Such a handsome monk, besides Master Vo Huan of Hokwak Temple who, though not yet reaching the age of 20, already possessed boundless Buddhist Dharma, there could be no one else. He walked past me, suddenly saying, Patron, you possess such a pure destiny, it's regrettable that a single thought can turn into a demon. Your killing intent is too heavy. I was speechless facing such a handsome face. I truly couldn't utter the 2 words stinky mo. NK, so I pointed at the grand hall where the ancestral tablets of generations of imperial family members were worshipped, and scoffed, saying, among those worshipped in there, who hasn't committed murderous deeds? If he could kill, then I can also kill. He suddenly looked up at me, his eyes clear as water, his pupils pitch black. I had never seen eyes so transparent. Seeing straight to the bottom, it was as if all the filth in the world could not tarnish him even a little. He said, so that's how it is. Is repaying karma with karma precisely your attachment, patron? He lowered his head and recited a Buddhist epithet, his voice deep, low, and sorrowful. This body is like fire, born from craving and desire. This body is like a shadow, existing due to karmic conditions. Why don't you leave a path to life for yourself, patron? The drizzle dripped onto the surface of the pond, creating crisp, tinkling sounds. I lowered my head to look at the withered lotus flowers on the water's surface, and smiled, saying, Hokwak Temple cannot even keep a single flower alive, let alone grant me a path to life. What joy is there in life, what sorrow is there in death? Great Master, born a Buddha, have you ever seen sentient beings in the realm of desire? In this world, there are those whose evil karma accumulates, acting without any scruples. There are those who only care for themselves, cherishing their own reputation and standing, and there are also those who sacrifice themselves for the Dharma, having no regrets even if they die. Between life and death, it is inherently just a choice. It is merely that you do not see through it, Great Master. He sighed, this humble monk is incompetent, unable to deliver the patron. I gave a laugh, handing him the fish food in my hand along with the brocade box from my sleeve, saying, Great Master Vo Huyen, I trouble you to keep this brocade box safe for me, this is truly my only attachment. I turned and walked down the stone bridge, the rain and wind blurring the view, the sky gradually darkening, making me unable to see the path ahead clearly. I also didn't know when this continuous summer rain would stop. Vo Huyen asked me from behind, when will the patron come to retrieve it? The Buddhist disciple, inherently untainted by worldly dust, stood in the gentle breeze and flying rain. I waved goodbye to him, and alone, holding an umbrella, walked into the desolate curtain of rain and wind. When the time is right, he will know. Chapter 10. After bathing and lighting incense, I put on white robes and went to the Buddha hall to find Van Dien. Shakyamuni Buddha was majestically solemn, compassionate towards sentient beings. Yun Yen sat upright under the Buddha statue. On the altar table was a flickering oil lamp, and he bowed his head under the lamplight, diligently copying scriptures. I had no intention of disturbing him, merely kneeling down behind the altar table, opposite him, to grind ink and copy the Surangama Sutra. He evidently did not expect that I would actually come to keep vigil and copy scriptures with him, merely looking at me with a slight surprise. He and I sat opposite each other without speaking, and accompanied by the wafting sandalwood incense and the patter of the night rain, we copied Buddhist scriptures throughout the night. After dawn, Master Wu Xuan arrived with the young novice monk, sealed the Buddhist scriptures we had copied, and offered them before the spirit tablet of Empress Shaoxian. I clasped my hands together in front of my chest, knelt before the spirit tablets of the imperial ancestors and the statue of Sakyamuni Buddha, and prostrated myself before the Buddha for the only and also the last time in this life. From now on, gods and Buddhas are irrelevant. Master Wu Xuan bid farewell to Yun Yen in front of Hukwa Temple. I sat in the carriage, looking at him through the curtain. He had something he wanted to say but refrained, so I smiled and shook my head at him, and left Hukwa Temple with Yun Yen. For several days in a row, it rained incessantly, and the mountain road became slippery and treacherous. After a sleepless night, I was drowsily dozing off in the jolting carriage when I was suddenly woken up by a burst of noisy sounds. The carriage had stopped at some unknown point, and I was lying in Van Dien's lap, completely without grace, just like a genuine Yufi. I was very happy. From behind the curtain, Muk Kai reported to Van Dien, Your Highness, the mountain road ahead is blocked by a landslide of large rocks and dry branches. It will take some time to clear it, He hadn't even finished his sentence when a feathered arrow ripped through the wind and flew towards them. Muk Kai reacted extremely quickly, drew his sword, chopped the arrow in two, and shouted loudly, Assassins! Protect your highness! As soon as he finished speaking, countless arrows ripped through the wind and flew towards them, and amidst the whistling sound of arrows, figures flashed in and out of sight, jumping down from the surrounding tree branches, holding swords, and charging towards Van Dien's carriage. In the persistent rain, the air was suddenly filled with the nauseating smell of fresh blood. Van Dien sat upright in the carriage, shielding me behind him, and coldly watched the scene of slaughter outside. From behind the curtain, I recognized them as assassins from the 12 Towers, then felt at ease hiding behind Van Dien to observe, all while thinking about how to make the assassins get close to Van Dien in a way that seemed authentic, but still managed to injure him precisely. I hadn't even finished thinking when I saw a dense crowd of masked people in black clothes burst out from the forest, their number at least 40 or 50. But the most important thing was, they were not assassins from the 12 Towers. This is a real assassination. Could it be that Van Tap doesn't trust me, secretly hiring assassins to kill Van Dien? No, absolutely not. If the Crown Prince truly assassinated and died, Duke Xinhua General Xiao would certainly rebel, and by then, even His Majesty wouldn't be able to protect anything. What's more, outside Xinjing, less than 5 li from the Imperial Army Grand Camp, to assassinate the current Crown Prince Van Tap wouldn't be so foolish. So who else could be so eager for Van Dien to die? I hadn't even had time to think clearly when I saw the assassins charging towards the carriage. Van Dien only had a squad of bodyguards with him, clearly no match for the superior numbers. The assassins of the 12th Pavilion, seeing the situation change, had already quietly retreated. Currently, outside the carriage, more than half of Yun Yan's guards were dead or injured, and it was clear the assassins were about to charge towards the carriage. Yun Yan instructed me to stay inside the carriage while he drew his sword and personally entered the fray. This mountain path had dense forest on one side and a high slope on the other, both ahead and behind. Large rocks and trees blocked the way. It seemed the mastermind had prepared very thoroughly. I could not reveal my identity, so I had no choice but to lift the curtain from inside the carriage and observe the situation outside. But the situation was not very optimistic. Muqi had sent out a distress signal to the imperial capital's garrison stationed nearby, but it was uncertain if they could hold out until reinforcements arrived. Unnoticed by Yun Yan and his group, the heaven silk, not hidden in my sleeve, had left my hand. The 1,000-year-old heaven silkworm thread was as sharp as a knife. With just a light pull, it could take a person's life. Of course, I could not make it too obvious, so I had no choice but to act by crippling their limbs, combined with flying daggers, one strike taking a life. Heavy rain poured down like white waves scattering pearls, and between heaven and earth, a strong, thick, bloody stench filled the air. The ground was muddy, strewn with severed limbs. Van Dyne seemed to be injured. I saw a deep crimson bloodstain on his white clothes. Only 2 or 3 guards remained. A gap appeared behind him, a flying sword plunged straight into his back, but he had no time to notice. I didn't have time to think much and immediately pounced forward. I couldn't use any techniques to block it. I could only use my own body to shield him. The sword tip pierced through my shoulder blade, and fresh blood immediately gushed out profusely. Van Dyne turned around and pulled me into his arms, simultaneously worrying about my wound and desperately fighting to slay the assassins. The mountain path, drenched by the torrential rainwater, became muddy and slippery, and he and I carelessly missed our footing and rolled down the steep slope. I only heard Muk-Kys heart-wrenching scream, "Your Highness." All the sounds of hacking and slashing gradually faded into the distance, leaving only the sound of wind and rain in my ears. Dry branches and broken rocks cut in, tore my robes. Perhaps Van Dyne was afraid of ruining this face of mine that could topple nations and cities, so he always shielded me in his embrace, to the extent that when we rolled down to the bottom of the slope, Van Dyne's snow-white robes were already stained with mud and dirt, as was to be expected, but his outer robe was also tattered beyond recognition. He, who was rightfully the crown prince of the Eastern Palace, now looked like the most handsome beggar in the world. I couldn't help it, I burst out laughing. Chapter 11. Van Dyne looked at me with a hint of helplessness, his tone not very pleasant and Gamboy, "Aren't you in pain?" Only then did I remember that I had been hit by a sword on my shoulder, and I couldn't help but hug the wound and groan. I forgot. Van Dyne sighed, bent down and picked me up. He was very good at adapting to circumstances. Even in such a terrible situation, he could remain calm, saying first, "Let's find a place to shelter from the rain." I was very impressed. But thinking about it again, it made sense. Intense fighting was taking place above at this moment, and it was unknown if reinforcements had arrived or not. Relatively speaking, it was still safer down here. Sure enough, Van Dyne found a cave to shelter from the rain. By this time, it was already dark. The rain had gradually subsided but was still dripping, and it seemed it wouldn't stop completely anytime soon. Inside the cave, there were dry branches and also traces of a fire having been lit. Perhaps it was a resting place for hunters in the mountains. Van Dyne took out a lighter to light the dry branches. A flickering light emitted in the cave, dispelling some of the coldness. I felt a little uneasy, fearing that assassins were pursuing us. If they saw the firelight, wouldn't it expose our position? Van Dyne seemed to notice my worry, and then comforted me. "It's all right, our reinforcements must have arrived, we just need to quietly wait for them to come and find us." Since he said so, I also felt somewhat relieved. My anxious heart suddenly had nowhere to settle, and could only focus on the pain. Only then did I feel that the wound caused by the sword was so painful, and I couldn't help but take several sharp intakes of breath. Suddenly, the firelight was half obscured. Van Dyne had come before me. He bent down to carefully examine my wound. Blood had soaked through my brocade robes, and the wound and the clothing had stuck together tightly. If the bleeding was not stopped, I feared that I would faint from too much blood loss. Van Dien took out hemostatic and anti-inflammatory medicine from his chest. At first glance, he seemed a little hesitant, and even his voice wavered slightly. Your wound needs to be stopped from bleeding as soon as possible. I will blindfold myself and apply the medicine for you. My wound was on my left shoulder blade. If the medicine was to be applied, my clothes had to be removed. Crown Prince Van Dien, who had always been calm and confident, was now unexpectedly embarrassed. Indeed, a young master who has never experienced life. I looked at him, smiling, and said, Your Highness has his eyes covered. How can he see where the wound is? Will he just grope around aimlessly? Yun Yen acted as if he didn't hear my teasing words, still calmly taking off my clothes. Then there's no need for the blindfold. I beg your pardon for the offense. The outer garment could still be taken off, but the inner garment had stuck tightly to the wound, so Yun Yen decisively ripped it open. Me. In the flickering firelight, the handsome contours of the young master were dimly outlined on the rock wall. He looked straight ahead, applying hemostatic and anti-inflammatory ointment to my wound. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead, and even his ears were flushed red. My shadow and his overlapped on the rock wall, like a pair of lovers passionately embracing. He tore a strip from his own still intact inner garment to bandage my wound. His warmth seemed to linger on the fabric, and I felt a slight heat. A sharp pain spread from my heart, little by little, as if I were being subjected to Ling Qi, quickly spreading throughout my limbs and bones, and my complexion instantly turned pale. Today was originally the day to take the antidote for the 10,000 ghosts goo. I had initially planned to arrange for people from the 12 towers to assassinate Yun Yen, only needing to prevent him from patrolling Jiangnan, and then I would return to the Eastern Palace in time to take the antidote. Unexpectedly, halfway there, another group of people appeared, forcing me and Yun Yen to fall down a mountain slope and become trapped in a cave. Now the 10,000 ghosts goo has flared up. The physical pain I can still force myself to endure, but the newly flaring goo poison makes my limbs weak, my whole body burning hot. I also lost too much blood, so my mind is a bit unclear, and I couldn't help but want to take off my clothes. Yun Yen had just put my clothes back on me. Seeing me like that, he was startled. He tightly clasped my hand, while I felt a cool chill from his body and couldn't help but want to lean close to him. He was rarely this flustered, not knowing whether to push me away or just let me embrace him. Fortunately, I tried to retain a sliver of reason and stopped in time. But not long after, I felt cold again. My whole body felt like it had fallen into an ice cellar, even my breath turned into ice, yet clearly, my body was hot as a furnace. This endlessly wicked, immortal goo poison, tormenting people, truly wants to take their lives. I tried to snuggle into Yun Yan's embrace, pulled his hand and placed it on my burning hot cheek, saying, Your Highness, I'm too cold. Yun Yan didn't know this was the 10,000 ghosts goo, only thinking that I had lost too much blood and had been drenched in the rain, which was why my high fever wouldn't subside. His outer robe, torn by rocks and branches, had been discarded long ago. A large part of his inner robe had been torn off to bandage my wounds, so at this moment, he had no choice but to take off his middle garment to wrap me completely. If it were a normal day, doing this much would already be his limit towards me, but today I had taken a sword blow for him. Yun Yen was a gentleman who knew how to be grateful and repay kindness, so he had no choice but to let me hug him tightly to warm myself. He didn't move, like a jade immortal, and moreover, he was an immortal whose clothes were disheveled. The 10,000 ghosts goo in my body caused pain as if I were being slowly sliced to death. Ling Qi, I was sometimes awake, sometimes dazed, but didn't dare to fall asleep, so I clung to Yun Yen and made him tell me stories. He was helpless, and asked me what story I wanted to hear. I thought for a moment, then smiled and said, How about telling the story between Your Highness and Nan Tingxue? Yun Yen lowered his eyes to look at me, his gaze not very friendly. Suingshi, reopening someone else's old wounds is not the conduct of a gentleman. Just as I took a breath, I pretended to be Ron Shuiji is in pain. Can't that make Your Highness feel a little distressed? Perhaps Yun Yen truly couldn't bear to see me suffering from illness, so he indulged me and recounted the old story of Nan Tingxue. I had always known that Crown Prince Yun Yen was excellent in literature and calligraphy, and his political discourse and strategies were top-notch, but I hadn't expected. The old story he told could be so moving, making me unable to help but sigh with emotion. In Van Dine's story, there is a childhood sweetheart A Tuet and a childhood friend Tu Kai. Spring arrived, the snow at Nam Lao completely melted, stirring the promise of the rare flower's emergence. He and she were originally a pair of childhood sweethearts, a fated serendipitous encounter preordained from within the mother's womb. When he was 7 years old, he first saw Nam Din Tuet, the A Tuet his mother often spoke of, in the Taoist temple. She descended from the sky, along with apricot blossoms filling the air, falling into his arms, and also falling into his heart. From a young age, a Tuet had been sent to be raised in the Taoist temple, unlike the sheltered young ladies from noble families he had ever met. She led him up trees to catch birds, down to the river to catch fish in spring. They flew kites on summer nights, they caught fireflies on autumn afternoons, they stole other people's sweet potatoes and were caught red-handed, and on winter nights, they lit a brazier and stole several jars of fine wine that the Grand Tutor had buried under a tree. He loved her soul, free and unrestrained like the wind, loved her fresh and vibrant vitality, and also loved the mischievous little mole on her cheek and her always smiling eyes. The year A Tuet came of age, Tu Kai promised her he would bring betrothal gifts to perform her coming-of-age ceremony on her birthday. Chapter 12. Dry Bra. Inches in the stone cave crackled, the night was very quiet, the rain and wind were hazy, dissolving into my eyes and turning into a sheet of white mist. I asked him, so what happened after that? Van Dine paused for a moment, his tone a little helpless. Go to sleep, Tingamboy. It turned out he told such gentle and deeply affectionate old stories to lull me to sleep. I hugged him a little tighter. Your Highness, I'm scared that if I fall asleep, I won't wake up again. Of course that wasn't it. I lied to him. I wasn't afraid of dying, but afraid that after falling into a deep sleep, my hazy mind would say things that shouldn't be said. But Van Dine believed it. He looked at me, his voice very serious. I won't let you die. Was it that he wouldn't let me die, or that he wouldn't let Tingamboy, who bore Nam Din Tuet's mole, die? I said, Your Highness, could you hold me? Van Dine hesitated for a moment, finally pulling me into his arms. I leaned into Van Dine's embrace, the 10,000 ghosts goo in my body temporarily subsided. I tried to suppress the dizziness, struggling to remain conscious. Outside, the gentle patter of rain inside the stone cave, the warm firelight. A moment later, Van Dine could no longer resist and fell asleep. I had managed to hold out longer than him, and finally, feeling at peace, I, too, drifted off to sleep. I seemed to have a very long dream. In the dream, I was not betrayed by the old Taoist master, but instead met Van Dine at the Taoist temple. He and I rode horses together through a forest of apricot blossoms blooming profusely in March, and galloped across the boundless fields. He said he wanted to take me to a very far-off place, a place without bloodshed, without hatred, where we would live a normal life together. When I woke up, I was already at Gue Zuyet Pavilion. Dai Dai was guarding by the bed, her swollen eyes looking as if she had been crying for a very long time. Seeing me awaken, she, both joyful and fearful, went to fetch medicine for me. Then, just like any other day, she prattled on ceaselessly by my ear. She said Van Dine had invited an imperial physician from the palace to attend to me, and also said Van Dine had fallen ill. Of these two pieces of news, I couldn't tell which one astonished me more. Unless the 10,000 ghosts goo in my body uses the mother goo as a conduit, it would be difficult to detect. Thinking of this point, I felt at ease. However, Van Dine also falling ill was truly beyond my expectation. Logically speaking, Van Dine had trained in martial arts since childhood, so he shouldn't have such a frail body. Nevertheless, with him being ill, the inspection tour to Jiangnan would certainly be impossible for him to undertake, and this suited my intentions perfectly. Aside from me, there were also others who did not want him to go to Jiangnan. The assassin of the crown prince was not Yun Tap. I couldn't immediately think of who it was, so I had to overlook it. In short, I had achieved Yun Tap's goal. Outside the window, with the sound of pattering rain, I suddenly remembered Yun Dai's story from last night. The one who assumes a role plays out a long dream even upon waking. They do not know where this self will go. 3 days later, a flood occurred in Shuzhou. The crown prince proposed patrolling to deal with the natural disaster, but he fell ill and was unable to go. The fifth prince, Yun Tap, due to the incident involving Chaoshi Terrace and the imperial consort, had been criticized by the censors, and was moreover still under house arrest, so he also could not leave the palace. As for the fourth prince, Prince Yun Quiet, he was solely devoted to seeking pleasure and had never concerned himself with state affairs. The second prince, Yun Jiak, who was implicated by Han Jiwei, was also staying behind closed doors. Therefore, this disaster relief matter ultimately fell upon the first prince Yun Kong, which was truly surprising to people. Yun Kang's birth mother was a palace maid. Only after giving birth to the prince was she conferred the title of Joey. Joey's son was not favored, and even the first prince was not valued by his majesty, having always been neglected. Joey's son's maternal clan was not an influential noble family, nor was it even a family of upright officials, but rather had been merchants for generations. Since Lady Sun was conferred the title of Joey, the Sun family gradually developed into a regionally wealthy imperial merchant family. No. His Majesty suddenly remembering he still had such a son is likely connected to this matter. Qi and Liang were constantly at war, and the national treasury and granaries mostly supplied the border troops, so there was originally little strength left to dispatch food and silver for disaster relief. Now that the first prince is going to conduct disaster relief, Lady Sun will naturally spare no expense and effort, ensuring this task is well done on behalf of the first prince. His Majesty calculated very carefully, truly a typical example of knowing who to use and how to use them. When I was feigning illness in bed, I happened to meet Van Dien, who was also feigning illness in bed. We met amidst the noisy cicada and frog sounds of Lingba Garden, where the continuous downpours of several days had finally ceased. The night moon illuminated the lotus pond, and the heat seemed to intoxicate people. Van Dien stood tall and imposing under the bright moonlight, like a pine and bamboo, extraordinarily handsome, not only showing no sign of illness at all but also seemingly having grown a bit taller, possessing an even more dashing and uninhibited demeanor. He cordially invited me to drink wine and admire the moon together, and facing such beauty, I found it very difficult to refuse. At first glance, Van Dien seemed completely unmoved by the rumors in the imperial court. It seemed he had long known that the great prince would be the final victor. The apricot blossom wine he had pilfered from an old acquaintance was truly irresistible, and I couldn't help but drink a few more cups. Under the shimmering moonlight, a peerless young master in this world, my heart swelled with joy as I looked at him, and I couldn't help but move closer to him. He lowered his gaze to look at me for a moment, then suddenly reached out a hand and gently stroked my cheek. The sudden closing of the distance made me somewhat unable to react. I just blankly stared at his thick, dense eyelashes. He sighed. This face is truly the handiwork of ghosts and gods. I was startled, more than half sober from the alcohol. Before I even had time to think, he asked me again, Tangamboy, are you in pain? In my memory, this seemed to be the third time Van Dien asked me if I was in pain. I didn't know what he meant. My heart just pounded like a drum, unable to settle. Only this one time in my life did I flee so frantically. From then on, for many days, I dared not meet Van Dien. All day long, I hid in Kui Tuet Pavilion, keeping the door shut and refusing to receive guests. Early this morning, I received news from the 12 Towers that Prince Yong, Van Tap, had spent a large sum of money to purchase all the assassins of the Heaven Character Pavilion. The 12 Towers is divided into 3 pavilions: Heaven Character, Earth Character, Human Character, and the Azura Hell. The Azura Hell trains Rakshasa masters, with only one emerging every 4 years. There are 3 other organizations that produce assassins, with the Thien-Tu Kak as their leader. The total number of assassins in the Thien-Tu Kak is 12. 12 masters, each capable of fighting 10. What does he intend to use them for? Chapter 13. The first Prince Van Kang, having received an imperial decree to provide disaster relief, had just arrived in Tuchao when the Zhongling dike suddenly broke. Floodwaters spread rampantly, fertile fields were severely damaged, houses were submerged, the common people were displaced everywhere, and cries of lament echoed. The maternal clan of the first prince contributed people and effort, not only donating relief money and transporting food supplies, but also gathering manpower to repair the Zhongling dike and clear the waterways. In the past half-month, the disaster situation has been brought under control, earning high praise from the emperor. Tuchao had been suffering from floods for a long time ever since the Lanzhong dike broke the previous year. The emperor had ordered the Ministry of Revenue to raise relief funds and construct the Zhongling dike. After the Zhongling dike was completed, the floods in Tuchao were resolved. But in less than 2 years, the Zhongling dike broke again, and the Lan River's dike broke once again. Was it a man-made disaster or a natural calamity? Just then, Van King submitted a memorial, reporting and accusing Han Di, Minister of the Board of Revenue, of embezzling relief funds, which led to the Zhongling dike breaking, submerging thousands of acres of fertile land, and plunging the common people into misery. Simultaneously, he had handed over the collected physical evidence and witnesses to the provincial administrations, who dispatched soldiers to escort them by water to Thin Kin, and they would arrive at Tai Tan Du in a few days, requesting His Majesty's sagacious judgment. Upon hearing this, the emperor was extremely furious, immediately dismissed and imprisoned Han Di, entrusting the Ministry of Punishments and the Bureau of Investigation to jointly interrogate him, and simultaneously ordered the Kim No Ve to immediately go to Tai Tan Du to escort the witnesses and physical evidence back to the capital to await trial. Van Tap spent a large sum of money to mobilize assassins from the Heavenly Character Pavilion. Could it be to assassinate the witnesses and destroy the physical evidence? But why would he care about Han Di's life or death? I was gazing out the window in a daze, when Dai Dai suddenly let out a cry. I jumped in surprise. Dai Dai hastily pulled me behind her back, and shrieked, "Guards! Someone has released a snake to harm the concubine." I glanced at the small white snake basking in the sun on the window bars, and quickly decided to knock Dai Dai unconscious. The silver rat that came to deliver news last time was beaten to death by Dai Dai. If the little white snake is harmed again this time, how can I explain myself to the Azure Bird Pavilion of the 12 Towers? If there's blame, it can only be placed on the messenger from the Azure Bird Pavilion for being excessively bizarre. I handed Dai Dai over to another maid, and at the same time issued an order that concubine Xueji wished to seclude herself to study tales of the demon consort, and for these 2 days no one was permitted to enter Kuishui Pavilion, especially Crown Prince Yunyan. No matter what Yunji is plotting, in this matter he has already lost the initiative. The witness will arrive at Xiandu today. If they want to assassinate, they can only fight a battle with the Jinwu guards. But between a battalion of Jinwu guards and 12 assassins from the Heavenly Character Pavilion, victory or defeat would be hard to discern. I must go and see for myself. I set out at midday, galloping like the wind, and arrived at dusk. The Jinwu guards had already sealed off Xiandu, evidently having taken custody of the witness and physical evidence from the provincial escorting troops. Although it was already getting dark, the Jinwu guards would not stop. Bound by an imperial decree, they had to escort the witness back to the capital that very night. I knocked out a Jinwu guard who was on patrol, stripped off his armor, and then blended in. While on patrol, I saw the carriage carrying the witness from afar and also saw a few familiar faces. Assassins from the Tiantu Pavilion had infiltrated, and they would begin their attack when night fell. Darkness gradually enveloped everything within the ranks. Torches burned, and soldiers wearing iron armor and carrying silver spears strictly guarded the carriage, advancing forward in a neat and solemn formation. Someone came up beside me and motioned for me to follow him. He and I walked into the woods beside the road. Among assassins, there was no inherent need to recognize one another. It was simply that sometimes upon meeting, they would remember. Evidently, he had recognized me. He asked me, "Lord Rakshasa, since you are here, does the pavilion master have any other instructions?" He must surely be a high-level master among the assassins of the Tiantu Pavilion, otherwise, he wouldn't have recognized me as Lord Rakshasa. It was just that he didn't know that I also worked for Prince Yong. I hadn't even had time to reply when, behind me, the sound of weapons clashing in battle rang out, firelight flickered, the earth-shattering sounds of slashing and killing shook the heavens, and the assassins of Heavenly Order Pavilion had already begun their operation. He had originally intended to turn around and go back, but unexpectedly drew his sword from its sheath, just in time to block my blade. As expected of a Heavenly Order assassin, he was quick-witted and astute, with extremely fast reactions. In his eyes, a fierce yet bewildered expression appeared, as if he didn't understand why I had suddenly attacked him. But I didn't give him time to find an answer. Every move was lethal. My blade techniques, forged in the azure hell, left no room for survival. Even as I ended his life with a single strike of my blade, his eyes were still filled with an incomprehensible look. Fresh blood spurted out, dyeing me crimson, and I bent down to close his eyes. Once he had recognized me, he could not live. As I carried my saber, intending to return to the battlefield, someone blocked my path. He turned around, clad in black, carrying a sword, wearing a green bronze mask, and the saber in my hand unconsciously fell onto the grass, without a sound. Muchi took me to a dense forest far from the execution ground. A carriage was half hidden in the forest. It was a light carriage, simply equipped for travel, looking nothing special, but if one saw the people sitting inside, one would probably not think so. What surprised me was that inside the carriage, besides Yunyan, there were also the debonair and free-spirited fourth Prince Yunju, and an official with sword-like eyebrows, deep-set eyes, and a thick beard, who was the Minister of Punishments, Xiao Pingzhao. When Xiao Pingzhao saw me, he was a little confused. The blood from earlier had flowed from my brow into my eye, making my eye sting uncomfortably, almost to the point of tearing up. I quickly raised my hand to wipe it away and said, "I unintentionally lost my composure. I hope Lord Xiao will forgive me." Xiao Pingzhao became even more confused and said hesitantly, "You know me?" I was about to answer when I suddenly heard Yun Yan say, "Concubine Shuiji must have met Lord Xiao before." Xiao Pingzhao asked no further questions, only saying that once matters here were concluded, he would take his leave of Yun Yan. As he got out of the carriage, he suddenly said, "Your Highness, for all these years searching for her among the sea of people has never been fulfilled. Even if one carves a cuckoo into a sparrow, the heart finds no peace. Why not let go of yourself?" After Xiao Pingzhao left, Prince An looked at me meaningfully and then also departed. I couldn't quite make sense of it. Taitandu lies in the neighboring county of Lanlang Commandery, and is the territory of the Xiao clan. Xiao Pingzhao, who was ordered to preside over this case, must have come specifically to assist, and there is nothing blameworthy in that. But Crown Prince Yunyan and Prince An Yunju, who had always disregarded state affairs, unexpectedly rode together in the same carriage. Isn't this indeed a strange matter? Inside the carriage, it was so quiet as to be a little eerie. Yunyan sat upright in the flickering oil lamplight, as cold as an immortal carved from jade. This demeanor of his made me feel very uneasy. Chapter 14. The carriage rattled forward, and I suddenly came to my senses, turning around intending to pull aside the curtain and jump down, but was pulled back by Yun Yan. He used too much force, and I directly fell into his embrace. He pushed me away, and I, disregarding the embarrassment, hastily said the witnesses and physical evidence. Yun Yan calm. Ly interrupted me. Killing people to silence them is not yet your turn. The 12th floor's heavenly character pavilion is exerting its full strength. What can she do? In the flickering oil lamplight, his handsome yet cold countenance was no longer that of the gentle and distant young master as when they first met. Seeing that he was completely unconcerned about the witness' safety, I thought perhaps the assassins of the 12th floor truly would not succeed. I feared his cold gaze, so I could only lower my eyes and remain silent. Yun Yan probably thought I had other schemes, and his tone became even more hostile. Handi must die, as will Prince An. Since you cannot save him, you might as well save some effort and think about how you yourself can survive. Prince An? Yunju? So it turned out he thought I was Prince An's person planted in the Eastern Palace. I was only surprised for a moment, then immediately seized the opportunity. Will your highness grant me a path to survival? I pulled his sleeve, knelt before him, and, as usual, rested my head on his knee, gently yet mournfully, if your highness can kill Han Di and deal with Princeton, it would be saving Xueji from boiling water and burning fire. Xueji will certainly tie grass and hold a ring in her mouth to repay your highness' benevolence. Yun Yan was as dignified as a deity, completely unmoved. I could only take another step, took his hand and placed it on my cheek, perfectly revealing a small vermilion mole, my e. Yes, brimming with tears. Xueji's life is like drifting duckweed, controlled and exploited by others. If your highness shows compassion, Xueji is willing to serve you for this entire lifetime, and even if she has to carve a cuckoo into a quail, she will not utter a single word of complaint. I remembered what Xiao Pingzhao said, and also knew Yun Yan's weakness. I gambled that he wouldn't be heartless enough to abandon or execute a person whose face, with its vermilion mole, was exactly like Nam Din Tuet's. Sure enough, despite waiting anxiously for a very long time, Van Dyne finally helped me up. But his gaze was still as cold as winter frost. He looked at me with those no longer gentle eyes, and said, I will not abandon you, nor will I kill you. As long as you know your place and keep to it, I will spare your life and return your freedom to you. You are not her. Do not take advantage of your slight resemblance to her to presumptuously speculate on my thoughts. I don't want you to die a disgraceful death. I am not her. Even if one were to carve a cormorant into a phoenix, it would still not be enough. What cruel words! I couldn't help but laugh, laughing until tears welled up in my eyes, only for them to be blown away by the strong wind. I knelt down and kowtowed twice, saying, Thank your highness for not killing me. After returning to the palace, Van Dyne placed me under house arrest. Although he didn't give a clear order, I knew I could no longer leave Tuet Pavilion. The reason he didn't issue an order was because Han Di and Princeton had not yet been eliminated. If they knew I had been exposed, I would surely become a discarded pawn. Yun Yan was still soft-hearted and kind. He wanted to preserve my life. Although I was confined within Tuet Pavilion, no news from the outside was ever missed. The Jingwu Guard was indeed no match for the 12 pavilions. When Tianzi Pavilion went all out, the Jingwu Guard could only be massacred. Although the Jingwu Guard was defeated, the witnesses and physical evidence safely reached the capital, because the so-called water route escort for the evidence was merely a pretense. Before the first prince officially submitted his memorial, the witnesses had already been secretly escorted by provincial troops. One day before the fake physical evidence arrived at Xixing Ferry, they had traveled by land into a neighboring county, where they were taken over by the Ministry of Justice. Currently, with sufficient witnesses and physical evidence, and with the Ministry of Justice and the Directorate of Investigation jointly deliberating, Han disembezzlement case was already a settled matter. It's just that during the few days Han Di was imprisoned, another embarrassing incident also occurred in the palace. A palace maid who plotted to harm noble consort Wang was beaten to death on the spot. Before dying, she explicitly named Consort Han. The emperor was furious, demoted Consort Han to a commoner, and imprisoned her in Shui Yu Palace. The second prince, who pleaded for his mother, was also detested by the emperor and confined to his residence in Anwang Manor. All discerning people knew that with Han Jiwei and Han Di both imprisoned, Consort Han imprisoned, the second prince had completely lost his position, and from now on, he no longer had any power to contend against the crown prince and Prince Yong. Not long after, Han Di suddenly confessed her crimes in prison, and moreover, she exposed 2 earth-shattering cases. And these 2 cases, either directly or indirectly, were all related to Crown Prince Yun Yan. The first case was precisely the assassination of the crown prince in the outskirts of the capital city. This was not surprising, as Han Di feared that the crown prince's inspection tour would uncover the illicit dealings in Jiangling, and thus decided to act, wanting Yun Yan dead. However, in the end, although the assassination failed, Yun Yan's trip to Jiangnan could not be carried out either. The first prince had never been taken seriously. No one paid him any attention. Han Di also assumed that with the first prince's abilities, nothing could be investigated. Who would have thought that in the end, the one who sent him to prison was precisely the first prince whom he had looked down upon? As for the second case, it directly traced back to the Battle of Xian City 4 years ago. In the Battle of Xian City, 50,000 soldiers of the Dingbei army perished, and General Zhenbei, Xie Jun, the heir of Duke Xinghua, died in battle. And Xiejun was Crown Prince Yunyan's maternal uncle. But the general, victorious in 100 battles, did not die at the hands of the enemy, but at the hands of treacherous officials. 4 years ago, Tuen Tan, on the northwest border of Qiliang, reported danger, and Lu Qiu, the general defending Tuen Tan, submitted a memorial requesting reinforcements. General Zhenbei Ta Quan, by imperial decree, led 50,000 Dingbei troops to provide reinforcement. Although Tuen Tan was located on the Qian border, it was not a strategic military stronghold, so its defenses were lax, its city walls had not been repaired for many years, and it could not withstand a single blow. Fortunately, although Tuen Tan was militarily weak, its terrain was treacherous, making it easy to defend and difficult to attack. Ta Quan adopted a defensive strategy, only defending and not attacking. Although the large army was pressing close, the expeditionary army was fatigued as long as the situation dragged on. The Yan army's provisions would certainly be insufficient, thus allowing them to defeat the enemy without expending troops or losing generals. Therefore, Ta Quan held the city and did not sally forth, while simultaneously repairing Tuen Tan's defensive fortifications, using rested troops to deal with the fatigued enemy. However, he did not expect that the Qi army was the one to run out of provisions first. Xiejun submitted memorials requesting military provisions countless times, but received no response whatsoever. The area around Xian City consisted entirely of impoverished villages and hamlets within a 10-li radius. There wasn't enough food to sustain the Dingbei army for 3 days. Facing pressure from the imperial court, which desired to withdraw the troops, Xiejun was left with no alternative but to achieve a swift decisive victory. However, they instead fell into Yixian Gorge, were encircled by the Yan army, and though they fought desperately to break out of the encirclement, very few managed to escape. At that time, the imperial court was completely unaware that Xiejun was beleaguered in Yixian Gorge. They merely believed that Xiejun and the 50,000 soldiers of the Dingbei army had suddenly gone missing during combat operations. Malicious individuals seized this opportunity to spread slanderous rumors, and the whispers that Xiejun had been defeated in battle and surrendered to the enemy spread far and wide. His Majesty believed it to be true, and nearly dethroned the Empress and deposed the Crown Prince. This, in turn, also culminated in the Southern Chancellor and the Grand Tutor conspiring in rebellion, and the Empress' demise. Afterwards, Tuen Tan fell, and Ta Quan's daughter, Ta Tuong, accepted the command in a time of peril, campaigned in Tuen Tan, and repelled the Yan army. It was only then that everyone knew Ta Quan had already died in Not Tuen Valley. The general, Indomita, bleed through 100 battles, his body gaunt, had myriad arrows pierce his heart. His head was cut off, and in his hand, he still gripped tightly the broken and tattered Qi military banner. The one who killed him was the blade of the Yan army, but the one wielding the blade was the Minister of War of Qi Kingdom, Vong Quan Can. Chapter 15. In Han Dis confession, he revealed that Minister of War Vong Quan Can had colluded with him to suppress Ta Quan's memorial requesting additional provisions and fodder, embezzle Tuen Tan's military provisions, and simultaneously force Lu Qiu, the general defending Tuen Tan, to lead Ta Quan into Not Tuen Valley. Ultimately, a renowned general of a generation perished at the hands of treacherous evildoers. Han Di was not just making empty claims, he presented ledgers of Vong Quan Can's embezzlement of military provisions and reduction of fodder as evidence. Although Lu Qiu had long been silenced, the Audit Bureau still found Lu Qiu's daughter, who fortunately survived, and obtained from her the secret order that Vong Quan Can wrote to Lu Qiu that year. At this point, I finally understood why Van Tap bought up the entire Thian Tu Pavilion to destroy the evidence. Because Vong Quan Can, the Minister of War, is the imperial noble consort's biological younger brother, and as the son of left Prime Minister Vong Man, he is also Van Tap's maternal uncle. If he wanted to protect Vong Quan Can, he first had to eliminate Han Di. Finally, the two departments convened a joint trial and passed judgment. Han Chi-oi, Vice Minister of the Ministry of Works, and Han Di, Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, were stripped of their official positions and exiled to a miasma-filled region. Vong Quan Can, the Minister of War, was dismissed from office and imprisoned permanently in the imperial prison. However, 3 days later, Han Chioi and Han Di were murdered on their way to exile. Subsequently, Vong Quan Can also died in prison. It is said that the 3 people died in identical ways, their hands tied behind their backs, kneeling facing south, a deep yet narrow cut made on their necks, bleeding dry to death, brutal and eerie. When Dai Dai described this scene to me, I was taking off the silver bracelet inlaid with 5 colored stones from my wrist to carefully clean it. 2 silver bracelets, each with 5 gems. Each time a gem was pulled out, a sharp, 1,000-year ice silk thread could be drawn from the silver bracelet. And just yesterday, the silk thread in my hand had cut through Vong Quan Can's throat. Van Dyne walked in just then, but he didn't look happy at all. Even though he had orchestrated all these events and kept himself clean, he was still unhappy. I really didn't understand. He had known long ago that Han Di, cornered and desperate, would come to assassinate him, but he still nonchalantly went to Ho Kwak Temple, because from the very beginning, he had no intention of personally going to Jeonnam. He had long since deployed his troops and set up his battle array, luring the prey into the jar. Han Di was merely bait, the fuse that ignited the fire to burn the grassland. What Han Di cared about most was the second prince, and at this very moment, Consort Han also plotted to harm imperial concubine Wang. Thus, the second prince would certainly lose his position, and Han Di would also naturally shift all blame onto both Lady Wang and the fifth prince, thereby exposing Wang Guanjin. And the important witness is Lu Kui's daughter. I find her a bit familiar. Isn't she one of the orioles and swallows that Yun Yan admitted into the Eastern Palace? This continuous counter-espionage scheme, one arrow hitting multiple targets, truly makes one marvel. Silver moonlight flooded the empty courtyard like a thin layer of mist. Yun Yan stepped on the moonlight towards me, pulled me up from the stone table. His gaze was no longer calm and profound, but like a sea surface churning with ink waves, very complex. I could not understand it. When he was gentle yet distant, I did not understand. Now with fierce waves and wind, I still do not understand. He asked me, why do you still want to kill people? His voice held back anger. I thought he was disgusted with me. But I looked at his handsome face, like jade, under the moonlight, such a beautiful face, such captivating eyes. Even if my reflection in them was ugly, no matter how despicable it was, I still liked him. I mocked my own wishful thinking, trying to reveal my dark thoughts, so I used the most nonchalant tone in the world to ask him, isn't the Rakshasa blade of the 12 pavilions meant for killing people? I was certain he had known long ago, I just didn't know how long he had been acting this play with me. I looked into his somber eyes, and chuckled softly. Others find it hard to buy the Rakshasa blade even with 1,000 gold, but I, for your highness, am content to do it without taking a single coin. Yun Yan was truly angry. He pushed me against the wall, his eyes, originally calm and deep, now surged with waves of anger. He said, I don't need you to kill people for me. My heart was like the moonlight suddenly falling at this moment, from the dark night falling into an even darker abyss. I was bewildered, not knowing what to do. Why? Don't they deserve to die? I kill them, and your highness isn't pleased? Yun Yan suddenly lowered his eyes, his voice was no longer furious, but like an endless sigh. I already said I would return your freedom to you. Don't kill people anymore, you are a person, not a blade. He said, I will preserve your life, return your freedom to you, you will no longer be the Rakshasa blade. Let go of all the past, and find your own path again. I looked at him and smiled, tears again sliding down the corners of my eyes, hidden in the darkness. I smiled and asked him, letting go of all the past, is it like your highness letting go of Nam Din Tuet? He said, this is not the same. My words, twisting in to his heart, truly drew blood like any blade, even sharper and more ruthless than a Rakshasa blade. Van Dyne, hit by me where it hurt, let go of me and turned to leave. In the moonlight, his retreating figure was proud and solitary. I suddenly felt my heart as if it were undergoing Ling Qi, an agony even worse than 10,000 ghost poisons. I screamed towards his back, Nam Din Tuet is dead. No matter how good she was, she can't come back to life. Van Dyne did not stop his steps nor turn his head. His voice was low and restrained, seeming to hold much helplessness, as he said, enough, Shueji. remember my words, don't kill anyone anymore. If you leave the eastern palace of your own accord, then don't come back. Chapter 16. Van Dyne left. I knew he wouldn't come again. I was locked in Tuyet Pavilion, and feeling frustrated, I took out the 100-flower mint cake that Dai Dai had brought back to vent my anger. Dai Dai was a loyal and devoted maid, but not good at understanding people's hearts. She merely thought that I was heartbroken due to Van Dyne's coldness, so one day she ran 3 trips to Lac Tuchuan to get pastries, only hoping to please me. The concubines outside gloated over the pain of others, all feeling that it was truly good that the demon consort was acting crazily. The days just passed in such a boring manner. Only the crown princess occasionally visited me, telling me about the storybooks she had recently read. In a flash, summer passed and autumn arrived in La Ingba garden. The lotuses withered and their leaves yellowed, while osmanthus flowers diffused their fragrance. August should have been a mournful autumn, but Xinjiang became bustling and lively instead. First Prince Van Kang returned successfully from disaster relief in Tuchao. All matters concerning the flood disaster in Tuchao and the post-disaster consolation efforts were handled appropriately, not only gaining the people's favor but also the emperor's favor. Ever since the maternal families of the second prince and fifth prince successively committed crimes, the emperor finally discovered that he still had a son whose maternal family was not involved in court politics and who was also talented. Therefore, as soon as the first prince returned to the capital, the emperor immediately assessed his merits and bestowed rewards, ordering Prince Chen, Van Kang, to take on the position of commander of the inner city, commanding the inner city imperial guards. The Imperial City Guard Army is divided into the Divine Machine Infantry Battalion and the Fierce Cavalry Battalion, a total of 20,000 soldiers responsible for patrolling and apprehending within the Imperial City, possessing the true military power. Everyone understood clearly in their hearts that this was His Majesty intentionally grooming the first prince. Therefore, Prince Chen's manor, originally deserted, had its threshold trodden down overnight, and the first prince, who had once endured so much neglect, suddenly became a sought-after commodity. Indeed, human hearts are not as constant as flowing water. Some households rejoiced while others grieved. The first prince finally received his bounty, and I was also happy for him, even though I myself was still confined in Tuyet Pavilion, dreaming of being a fish. And besides Jin Kong, there was another person also about to return, General Zhenbei Xiaxiang. His Majesty wished to host a mid-autumn family banquet, and specifically issued an imperial decree summoning Duke Xinghua back to the capital, first to report on his duties, and second to enjoy mid-autumn together. Duke Xinghua Xiahuaiwei was an elder statesman of 3 reigns, and at the age of 60 still commanded 300,000 northern pacifying army, guarding Yunzhou on the northern border of Great Qi. Danqiao was a place where Qi and Yan constantly vied with each other in warfare, with continuous battles for many years. Xia Huainoi submitted a memorial stating there was an urgent matter at the border and he dared not leave on his own accord, therefore he specially dispatched General Zhenbei Xiaxiang to return to the capital to report on affairs on his behalf. One day before the Mid-Autumn Festival, Xiaxiang led the left and right generals and 50 soldiers with military merits into Xinjiang. Before the Mid-Autumn family banquet, the emperor received Xiaxiang and the generals at Taiji Hall to discuss their merits and bestow rewards. It was supposed to be a joyful matter. However, the 2 deputy generals during the audience appeared quite indifferent towards their commanding general, Xiaxiang, making it seem that the rumors circulating early on in court, that Xiaxiang was not popular with the army, also held some truth. The impression Xiaxiang left on the court officials this time he returned to the capital was generally that he was cold and domineering, stubborn and conservative, just as in the rumors, yet also quite unseemly. On the second day after Xiaxiang's unseemly behavior at the Mid-Autumn banquet, he immediately drank alcohol and caused trouble at Luosi Pavilion, where he ran into the capital's new favorite, the first prince. Yun Kong was an upright and impartial person. He wanted to enforce the law and detained Xiaxiang for 3 days. Xiaxiang refused, and the 2 immediately fought at Luosi Pavilion. Fortunately, Prince Yunji, happened to pass by, intervened, and mediated. Only then did this matter temporarily subside. But although the incident had passed, I'm afraid the grudge had already been forged. I was confined in Tuyết Pavilion, listening to Dai recount this thrilling and captivating story. My heart churned with regret that I couldn't witness such a tumultuous event firsthand, and I felt profound pity. But the next day, Seseong entered the Eastern Palace to pay respects to Crown Prince Yunyan, and this greatly delighted me. A heroic female general is a rare sight. I simply must join in the merriment. Yunyan had only said I was not allowed to leave the Eastern Palace. Leaving Tuyết Pavilion surely wouldn't be a major issue. When I stealthily arrived at Lingbo Garden, a bright moon had just risen above the osmanthus tree, birds chirped in the deserted courtyard, flowers fell with their fragrance filling the air, and Yunyan and Seseong were sitting in Yandu Pavilion, gazing at the moon. I held my breath, focused my mind, and squatted behind the rockery, wholeheartedly eavesdropping. For years ago, after Xiejun, the heir apparent of the Duke of Jingua, was defeated in battle and Xianqing fell, Seseong proactively volunteered to go to war, decisively defeated the Yan army, and reclaimed the territory. At that time, she was merely a 17-year-old maiden still awaiting marriage in her boudoir. Campaigns on the battlefield, turning the tide, for years of warfare had forged her into a decisive, ruthless female general under the cold moonlight today. She took off her armor, donning a set of deep crimson riding attire, appearing valiant and imposing. She did not call Yunyan Crown Prince or Your Highness. She called him by his courtesy name, Ziki. The iron-blooded, ruthless general in the eyes of the court officials dedicated all her tender affection to her cousin, the Crown Prince, who was imprisoned deep within the palace, walking on thin ice. She was his rare remaining relative in this world. There would be a day when he would become a solitary figure, sitting on the high throne. They faced the bright moon over the cold pond, chatting about many everyday things. Mostly Seseong spoke, and Yunyan listened intently. She told him about the warfare and the wind and snow in the borderlands, and also about the customs and traditions of other nations. I suddenly remembered that a very long time ago, there was also someone who often meticulously wrote letters to tell me interesting stories from the frontier residents, while I, in turn, sent him one or two flower branches from the prosperous land of Xinjiang. Afterwards, communication ceased, and the old acquaintance did not return. Old stories flowed with the current now. Thinking back, it feels like an ephemeral dream. I don't know when Seseong left. Yunyan sat alone for a very long time in Yandu Pavilion, facing the bright moon over the cold pond. It was unclear what he was pondering. I stepped out from the darkness of the rockery. Yunyan was not at all surprised by my appearance. On the contrary, he pointed at the stone table opposite and said to me, "It just so happens, let's share a cup of drink together." In this full moon night where people were not whole, I quietly drank wine with him, pretending not to see each other's sorrow, mistakenly believing that if tears fell into the wine, sorrow would dissolve into the moonlight. I was dead drunk, lying on the green stone table, when I suddenly heard Yunyan's hoarse voice. He said, "My maternal grandfather is about to pass away." I know. Before leaving, Seseong told Yunyan that the real reason Duke Xinhua did not return to the capital to report on his duties was not because there was an urgent matter at the border, but because he was gravely ill and unlikely to recover, making him unable to travel. She said grandfather said, his greatest regret in this life is not being able to personally witness Ziki perform the coming-of-age ceremony. The person he worries about the most is still you. Therefore, even if it's a dragon's den or a tiger's lair, your cousin will brave it for you. No one can oppress the brilliant pearl of my Xia family. The brilliant pearl of the Xia family, deceived by candlelight, had long been covered in dust. Yunyan was also drunk. He leaned on my shoulder, finally resembling a young master who had not yet reached the age for capping, his voice truly mournful. My maternal uncle is gone, Prime Minister Nan is gone, the Grand Tutor is gone, the Empress Dowager and A Shui are also gone, now even my maternal grandfather is about to leave me. I, the solitary one, am precisely like this. Being a solitary person myself, I truly could not console his sorrow. I was also suffering and lonely just like him. But he was not meant to be like me. I meticulously described to him a warm future, filled with the warmth of human life. Your Highness, you will not be lonely later. You will have someone to love, someone to understand, someone to keep you company, and you will also have your own child. Ren, many little princes and princesses, all as gentle and intelligent as you. They will be by your side, from dawn until moonset, never leaving morning or night, until time passes and the years fade away. The moonlight, like fine dust rain, shone into my heart, which at this moment was filled with ice and snow. The pledge made for the luminous pearl in the dead of night would ultimately not be extinguished by the strong wind. The intoxicating fumes seeped into his being, and Van Dyne leaned on my shoulder, falling into a deep sleep. I wonder if the mortal days I described to him could enter his dreams tonight, like apricot groves blooming in March, adorning his pale heart or comforting his fear of being lost. I longed to hold him like that, until dawn or forever after, but the night was already deep. Palace attendants from the crown prince's side came looking for him, and he still had to return to the place where he belonged, just as I still had to depart. I stood in Nandu Pavilion, the foliage swaying, watching Van Dyne's carriage gradually fade into the distance in the moonlight. A strong wind blew from who knows where, scattering the moonlight and flower shadows, the vast ripples like a heart that could not find peace. Early the next morning, I, as usual, found fault with everything about the mint-100 flower pastry that Lac Tuchuan delivered. Dai, as always, defended her master, indignantly carrying the box of pastries to go find Lac Tuchuan. However, this time, concealed within the box of mint-100 flower cakes was a mold that was an exact replica. The Eastern Palace staff originally conducted very strict inspections, but as I had caused trouble these past few days without anything unusual ever being discovered, they gradually became negligent. Who could have imagined that this time, inside the 100-flower cake box, my secret message for Van Tap was actually concealed? Inside the mold was a thin piece of paper, on which a few brief lines were written short, but enough to throw the capital Thin Kin into turmoil. Duke Xinghua is critically ill, the time has come, we can act. Chapter 17. 3 days later, the Imperial Observatory and the Ministry of Rites jointly submitted a memorial, stating that with the auspicious signs of accumulated virtues and hanging radiance, auspicious stars, and propitious clouds, it was divined that the 9th day of the 9th lunar month was an auspicious day, an omen sent down by heaven, and as the Emperor had received the mandate, the capping ceremony should be held. Therefore, His Imperial Majesty issued an edict, choosing the 9th day of the 9th month to hold the capping ceremony for the Crown Prince. Concurrently, General Zhenbei Xiaxiong was specially permitted to remain in the capital after the Crown Prince's capping ceremony, and a date would then be chosen for his return to Yunzhou. When the current emperor was still the Crown Prince, he had once displeased the late emperor, who several times wanted to depose him and establish a new heir. Later, the current emperor painstakingly sought a marriage alliance, marrying Xie Zhiyun, the legitimate daughter of the Xie family, as his main consort, thereby gaining the support of Duke Xinghua and the 300,000 Dingbei army behind him, coercing the imperial court to establish himself, and only then becoming emperor Wen Yuan as he is today. But now, the military power in the hands of Duke Xinghua has instead become a knife hanging precariously over the current emperor's neck. At present, Duke Xinghua is already utterly exhausted and depleted of strength, while Xiaxiong, the only one who can inherit the Dingbei army, has not gained the favor of the troops and is currently under house arrest in Xinjing. Soldiers without a general are a disorganized rabble, while a general without soldiers is like a fish stranded on land that can only be slaughtered by others. Such a once-in-a-millennium opportunity, yet the emperor still disregarded the fact that Crown Prince Yun Dain's actual coming-of-age ceremony should be next year. On the second day after the imperial edict was issued to all places, hidden in the box of mint-100 flower cakes delivered by Lac Tu Pavilion was a packet of snow-white powder, colorless and odorless, dissolving immediately upon contact with water. That was a type of top-grade madness-inducing drug Vong Neem. The so-called all formations and characteristics are impermanent, delusive thoughts and obsessi. Madness, one's very being a living hell. This seemingly harmless and pure substance could awaken the deepest attachments, fears, resentments, rage, and madness within people's hearts, causing them to become mentally disoriented and descend into utter delirium. Of course, this dose of madness-inducing drug was intended for Crown Prince Yun Dain. During the capping ceremony, the Crown Prince would use a jade ladle to taste the sacrificial wine, and Vong Neem, upon encountering the wine, would take effect. By then, Yun Dain would certainly lose his composure in front of His Majesty and the great ministers, thus creating an opportunity for the emperor to depose the crown prince, allowing Yun Tap to seize the chance to usurp the throne. The night before the capping ceremony, I wore a brocade gown woven with moonlight patterns, my cloud-like hair swept up high, and sat under the apricot tree in the courtyard, waiting for Yun Dain to arrive. My intuition told me that he would definitely come. In the brazier, Old Snow brewed new tea. Waiting until the tea's fragrance wafted, Yun Yen stepped on the moonlight and walked towards me. Seeing me dressed up, brewing tea and waiting, he smiled and asked, "Is it that today the Oriole Snow Pavilion had a magpie bringing news, which is why Shuiji dressed up to wait for me to return?" Flowers falling on the eaves, clouds obscuring the moonlight, all seemed as if they could not compare to the gentle and handsome look in his eyes at this moment. Tioch. A wife in the poem dressed up to wait for her husband to return, but I am merely a thief, stealing this bit of fleeting affection only to satisfy my own deluded fantasies. I poured tea for him. The tea water was emerald green, its fragrance intensely aromatic. I knelt before him, personally offering this cup of tea, resting my head against his knee as usual, and said with a smile, "That's right, the magpie has been singing all day. If your highness did not come, then I would have to wash off my makeup, with my hair disheveled." Yun Yen seemed to smile. He gently stroked my temple hair, his voice still as gentle as the first time we met, saying, "It was I who made Shuiji wait for so long, so use this as an apology." In his open palm was an jade-colored porcelain bottle. I took it and opened it. A strange scent wafted into my nose. I stared blankly at the porcelain bottle, almost unable to find my voice. This is the antidote for the 10,000 ghosts goo. Assassins have no heart. If they don't even have a heart, how can they be loyal? Therefore, this 10,000 ghosts goo is the means to ensure assassins' loyalty to their master. Only the pavilion lord of the 12 pavilions and the buyer have the antidote, and my antidote was originally supposed to be in Yun Jis' hands. Moonlight fell into his eyes, as if falling into a deep pool. I couldn't clearly see what kind of moonlight was in his deep eyes. I only heard his voice. He said, "From now on, you no longer need to be control." Led by Prince Yong. So he knew everything. He knew I was an assassin of the 12 towers, knew I was the Rakshasa Lord, knew I was afflicted with the 10,000 ghosts goo, and also knew the person behind me was Prince Yong, not Prince In. That day he asked me in the carriage, it was merely to probe. Even so, even if tomorrow is a hangmen banquet, a situation of 9 deaths and 1 life, he still wants to give me the antidote tonight? Van Dien, why are you so kind? Do you know that a gentleman as pure as jade like you is born to be destroyed, to be shattered? I carefully held that vial of antidote. I should have been happy, but for some reason, my heart ached as if cut. The moonlight fell into my eyes, turning into mist, slowly sliding down the corners of my eyes. I bowed my head to give thanks. "Thank you, Your Highness, for preserving my life." "It's just that Your Highness' kindness is so profound. Shuiji does not know what to offer to congratulate Your Highness on the capping ceremony." He helped me up, pale clouds and a clear moon, chilling autumn mist, but his hands were still warm, like the first time we met when the snow melted. He smiled under the moonlight, his voice gentle. "A beauty with an icy soul, brewing tea with melted snow. If she could also light a lamp to see me off, that would be the best gift. What more could I wish for?" He emptied the cup of green tea, turned around, and stepped into the thick darkness of the night. The moment he stepped out of Tuyet Pavilion, I still couldn't help but lift my skirt and run after him, for the first and last time, indulging myself, immersing in this infatuated delusion, hugging him tightly. Van Dien was startled. He didn't push me away nor did he move, just let me hug him like that, standing silently for a very long time in the cold mist and moonlight. It seemed he wanted to grasp my hands that were hugging his waist, but in that instant, I let go, then retreated towards my own shadows. I watched his back, the frost of 20 autumns all melted in my eyes at this moment. I smiled and said, "Your Highness, please go, don't turn back and don't search anymore." I knelt down behind him, placed my hand against my forehead, bowed my head close to the ground, for the first time performed a courtesy to him like a subject. "I wish Your Highness hereafter to have someone to accompany you in peace and joy morning and night. May you have blessings and longevity, a gentleman for 10,000 years." His silhouette under the moonlight was long and solitary. It seemed a very long time later. He finally asked me, "Do you want to leave?" I clutched that antidote bottle tightly, said yes, I am free now, thank you, Your Highness. I couldn't see his expression. He raised his head to look at the bright moon in the sky, softly sighed and said, "That's good." Then, mountains and rivers separate us. My throat felt choked, with immense pain, therefore the phrase "no prospect of future meeting" which I had intended to utter was choked in my throat. I swallowed down all my feelings, softly smiled and said, "1,000 li, the same as with you." He didn't turn his head back, only said all right. I remained standing in place, watched him leave. He listened to my words, did not turn his head back at all. I also didn't chase after him anymore. Chapter 18. I sat alone in the cold mist until dawn, until Dai Dai brought the first freshly steamed basket of 100-flour mint cakes from Lac Tuchuan to find me. I told her that I was about to leave. Dai Dai's eyes were red-rimmed as she said she wanted to go with me, so I played a game with Dai Dai, telling her to pretend to be me, pack her belongings and go to Thaplai Pavilion in the outskirts to wait for me. Dai Dai, both frightened and obedient, pretended to be me, turning her head 3 times with every step as she left the palace. I smiled as I saw her off out of the palace, then changed into palace maid's clothes, mingling into the ceremonial procession for the crown prince's capping ceremony. The emperor set up an altar outside Taiji Hall to perform the capping ceremony for the crown prince. Outside the hall, all civil and military officials stood in rows, and the ceremonial procession was solemn and majestic. The sound of drums echoed, and the fragrance of flowers spread throughout the hall. I stood in the ceremonial procession, seeing the various princes standing before the white jade steps: the first prince, Prince Chen, then Kang the second prince, Pr. Inson, then Jiak the fourth prince, Prince En, then Quiet and the fifth prince, Prince Yong, then Tap. Van Tap sensed my gaze, looked towards the long steps, and I subtly nodded, signaling to him that everything was ready. He had always been arrogant, acting as if victory was certainly in his grasp. He had 30,000 soldiers garrisoned in the capital under Commander Yang Shuguan, and also 2,000 imperial guards and 1,000 Kim No guards, which the emperor tacitly approved, perhaps even including the Grand Prince's 20,000 imperial guards, whereas Yun Yan only had Xie Xiang and 50 soldiers whom she brought back to the capital. This was a game of chess with a predetermined victory, with favorable celestial conditions, advantageous geographical position, and harmonious human relations, only awaiting the opportune moment. The eunuch presented the treasures, the sound of golden bells reverberated across heaven and earth, whips cracked in the hall, chamberlains announced the ceremony, proclaiming that the emperor's imperial carriage had arrived. All officials prostrated themselves and kowtowed. Emperor Wen Yuan descended from his palanquin, sat upon the main seat, and looked down at his important ministers. As the curtains rolled up and the fans opened, only then did I clearly see the emperor's imperial countenance, his dignified red imperial robe, his cold expression, and although he was only just over 40 years old, he already seemed aged. After that, the officials of the Eastern Palace entered, and the master of ceremonies led the crown prince out. The young prince, with a jade-like physique, imposing and majestic, slowly walked across the long palace pathway, with the morning sun's rays and 10,000 zhang of auspicious clouds behind him. After removing the ceremonial robes according to the regulations, music was played, and the crown prince performed the capping ceremony. For the first time, he donned the cloth cap, abandoning childish will, and carefully cultivating virtue. For the second time, he donned the far-traveling cap, reverent and majestic, clearly displaying his virtue. For the third time, he donned the crown, majestic in his ceremonial robes, in order to achieve virtue. The ceremony is complete. On this auspicious day and month, let the courtesy name be announced, as a gentleman should possess. In accordance with the blessings, may he be forever protected. We humbly request your majesty to bestow a courtesy name upon the crown prince. After that, the crown prince received the goblet and drank the sacrificial wine, changed into court robes, and amidst the synchronized chanting of the ritual officials, prostrated himself before the emperor, requesting the bestowal of the courtesy name. All the officials prostrated themselves, and the ceremonial music temporarily paused. In the great hall of Hong Men, wind blew past, leaving traces, only the voice of His Majesty alone was heard, deep and majestic. He looked down at the crown prince standing below the imperial throne, saying rituals are established to rectify the names of ruler and minister, for intimacy between father and son, and harmony between brothers. Filial piety, fraternal respect, loyalty, and obedience must be practiced before one can be considered human. Only by being human can one then govern others. Today I ask the Crown Prince, regarding these 4 words: filial piety, fraternal respect, loyalty, and obedience, have you done anything to be ashamed of? The wind fell silent, and the multitude of officials were terrified. The coming-of-age ceremony, having progressed to this step of bestowing a courtesy name, was originally supposed to be a perfect conclusion, but unexpectedly the emperor suddenly interrogated him severely. It was clear that the imperial countenance was displeased. This small spark of anger made the great ministers, who had served for many years, feel a chill, and the great hall was as silent as the primordial era. The young noble prince, with a solemn demeanor and regulated conduct, respected His Majesty as both ruler and father, even though the ruler and father, high above, had never shown him even a shred of affection as between ruler and minister, or father and son. He bowed his head and said, "Although I am not intelligent, I respectfully obey commands, proceed cautiously at every step, and my words and deeds are without shame before my conscience." His Majesty coldly looked at the Crown Prince. Ho was respectfully and solemnly standing below the hall, and said with a faint smile, "What a fine claim, without shame before my conscience. Relying on maternal relatives is disloyalty, harboring resentment is unfilial, disharmony among brothers is fraternal disrespect, defying words and abandoning commands is disobedience. I ask the Crown Prince, with such disloyalty, unfilial conduct, fraternal disrespect, and disobedience, how can you be considered human? Crown Prince, do you know your crimes? It is a crime for the Duke of Dinbak's merits to be so high that they overshadow the ruler. It is a crime for the Crown Prince to feel uneasy because of old friends. It is a crime to punish the factions of his brothers who eyed the Eastern Palace, and it is also a crime not to meekly accept death. When the king desires his subject to die, if the subject does not die, it is a monstrous crime. When His Majesty wished to impute crimes, the officials were terrified, some secretly rejoiced, while others were heartbroken. The Crown Prince stood in the hall like a solitary crane standing in a swamp. He slowly said, "This subject has no crime, but I have regrets. The Empress, grieving, ruined her health and passed away from illness. This subject could not share the Empress Mother's worries or take her place. I have regrets. General Tranbach was framed by treacherous officials and died in battle at Twenton. This subject was completely unaware, allowing the ringleaders to roam free beyond the law. I have regrets. Grand Tutor and Minister Nam, who were loyal and upright, were harmed by slanderous words. Their honest lineage was wiped out in one morning. This subject could not save the loyal and good. I have regrets." He had always been respectful and knew proper etiquette, his voice calm and gentle, yet it rang out forcefully. "This subject humbly asks your Majesty, when the birds are gone, the bows and arrows are put away, to suspect the loyal and good, to destroy one's own great wall, is there regret, is there crime? It seemed he had never imagined that there would come a day when the Crown Prince, who had always been gentle and respectful, would dare to defy the imperial will in such a way. The emperor trembled with rage, and in his fury, he smashed the inkstone that a eunuch had presented for him to bestow a decree. Below the hall, Prince Vin shouted loudly, "The Crown Prince is audacious enough to offend the emperor, speaking such treacherous and unfilial words." On the other side, Left Prime Minister Vong Man held his ceremonial tablet, knelt down, and reported, "Your Majesty possesses divine talent, but the Crown Prince has transgressed, his virtue is flawed, and it is feared he will struggle to bear the heavy responsibility of the great Qi nation and its myriad people. This subject humbly requests, abolish the Crown Prince's position of Van Dien." No sooner had the Prime Minister finished speaking than more than half of the high officials in the Grand Hall trotted themselves, each in agreement, requesting His Majesty to depose the Eastern Palace. Father and son plotted together, court officials betrayed, the young prince stood isolated amidst a pack of wolves, jackals, tigers, and leopards, all bearing their sharp fangs and claws at him. their eyes greedy, just waiting for a single word from the emperor to immediately pounce, tear him to pieces, drink his blood, and eat his flesh. I coldly watched all of this, watching the crown prince, wearing his crown and dragon robe, standing isolated below the imperial throne. The crown prince was empty-handed. What would he do to break free from this mortal situation with the surrounding pack of wolves? The Eastern Palace officials knelt in fear, begging the emperor to forgive the crown prince. The emperor, unable to contain his anger, amidst the pleas of the great ministers led by the prime minister, issued an imperial decree to strip the crown prince of his crown and ceremonial robes, and imprison him in the imperial clan court. The imperial guards advanced to obey the order but were blocked by one person below the jade steps. Xie Xiang, wearing purple martial officials' court robes with a jade belt, stood alone, blocking in front of the crown prince, looking down at the terrified great ministers below the steps and the imperial guards waiting for orders. Coldly and mockingly, she said, "I'd like to see who dares." Chapter 19 Jingwen Huan. Today, whoever wants to lay a hand on the crown NCE, first ask the sword in my hand. She snatched the long sword from the imperial guard's hand. Blood splattered on the jade steps. The ministers buzzed. Yunji shouted loudly, "Xie Xiang, are you trying to rebel?" The female general, holding the long sword, she looked at the emperor sitting on the imperial throne, coldly scoffed, "Rebel? My Xie family committed acts of rebellion. It wasn't just these one or two matters, was it? Does your majesty still remember clearly, I wonder?" She was reminding the current emperor that the supreme imperial throne of the 95 paragon he sat upon today was also obtained because the Duke of Jingwe back then forced the abdication. If the first day was already done back then, why fear the full moon today? Forcing an emperor to abdicate was inherently an extremely taboo act for a monarch. Now someone dared to touch the imperial dragon's reverse scale in front of all the common people and officials. The current emperor could not suppress his rage and roared loudly, "Jinwu and Wulin guards, Grand Tutor Xia and the crown prince are plotting treason. Kill without mercy." The two generals received the order, donned their dark armor, and completely surrounded the ceremonial platform. Now that His Majesty had given the command, the Jinwu and Wulin guards, emboldened by their authority, showed no restraint, raising their blades and advancing directly towards the crown prince and Grand Tutor Xia on the high platform. Unexpectedly, when they were still some distance away, from the horizon suddenly echoed the clashing of blades and the shouts of soldiers, cries that shook heaven and earth. Vaguely, one could also smell a strong, pungent stench of blood. In an instant, the black-clad imperial guards, like a surging flood, poured in, densely encircling the Jinwu and Wulin guards who were about to surround and kill the crown prince and Grand Tutor Xia. Divine Prince Yun Kong pulled up his robes, knelt down, and declared loudly, "Your humble servant led the Shinji battalion of the imperial guards to rescue your highness, but arrived late. I beg your highness to forgive my transgression." He knelt before Crown Prince Yun Yen, and not the current emperor. Before the Hall of Supreme Harmony, armor-clad soldiers were densely arrayed, and the hundreds of officials were in a panic. At that moment, everyone suddenly realized that the Hongmen banquet, originally set up for the crown prince, had turned out to be a strategy of using an opponent's plan against them to force the emperor to abdicate. The emperor, seated on his throne, it was unclear whether he was more indignant or more astonished. He had not expected the prince, whom he himself had promoted and nurtured, would ultimately point his sword at him. Witnessing the turn of events, he cried out in alarm, "Where is the imperial capital guard? Where is Yang Shuguan?" If 30,000 imperial capital troops had come to rescue him, the crown prince and Prince Shen would not necessarily be assured of victory. However, the scouts frantically ran back to report that the 30,000 imperial capital troops had been encircled outside the city by two deputy generals of Xie Xiang leading 10,000 troops. Furthermore, the Imperial Guard Cavalry Battalion and the Divine Machine Battalion had fortified the city gates, making it fundamentally impossible for Yang Shuguan to bring troops to rescue the emperor. The Dingbei army that Xie Xiang had brought was not 50 men, but 10,000 elite soldiers. How could these 10,000 troops have bypassed everyone's eyes and ears, secretly, unbeknownst to gods or ghosts, traveling directly from Vanchao to the outskirts of Xinjiang? No one knew, and no one bothered to pay attention. In this life-and-death game of chess, the crown prince had moved his troops across the river, pushed his horses to pressure the general, and victory and defeat seemed already decided. The current emperor helplessly slumped onto the throne, while below the platform, surrounded by soldiers and weapons, hundreds of officials prostrated themselves, trembling. Years of scheming instantly vanished into thin air, but the emperor's prestige had long been established, and his heavenly might still remained. As long as he was still the emperor, whoever dared to offend heavenly authority and usurp the throne would surely be scared out of their wits. He angrily glared down and roared, "Kim No and Vu Lam, whoever slaughters all the treacherous rebel Dillons will be rewarded 1,000 gold and granted the title of Grand Minister. Any one of you under my command who has rebelled, if you repent, abandon your armor, and surrender, your soldiers will not be punished like the generals." As soon as the golden words were spoken, the two guard units, Kim No and Vu Lam, poured all their strength, risking death to hack and kill alongside the imperial bodyguard troops of the Divine Machine Battalion. Swords and blades clashed, making it hard to distinguish friend from foe. In front of the Hall of Supreme Harmony, where just moments ago ceremonial music still resounded, it instantly transformed into a reeking sea of blood. Fresh blood stained the entire palace steps crimson, and the majestic main hall of the Great Qi Imperial Palace suddenly turned into an azure hell. In the midst of the melee, Van Tap threw the royal command token to me, shouting, "Rakshasa blade, protect the emperor and the prime minister." I caught the royal command token, seized a blade and charged among the soldiers, slashing and killing my way to the imperial seat, then, using Prince Yong's command medallion, led a detachment of golden guards to escort the emperor and the prime minister to retreat inside the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Amidst the surging sea of people slaughtering each other, I briefly glimpsed Crown Prince Van Dyne standing imposingly on a high platform, his gaze as deep as 1,000-year frozen sea, unfathomably profound and inscrutable. He watched my figure as I escorted the emperor and the prime minister retreating into the hall. In truth, no one wanted to kill the emperor, not even Van Dyne and Xie Xiong. The crime of regicide is unforgivable through the ages. Even if it was forcing the emperor to abdicate, it would still have to be the emperor ceding the throne to the crown prince, rather than the crown prince killing his father to seize the throne. The Imperial Forest Guard stood strict guard outside the Hall of Supreme Harmony. The hall's doors were tightly shut, and inside, a detachment of golden guards, armed with blades, protected the emperor and the prime minister. Autumn sunlight cast the shadows of those fighting and killing outside onto the great hall's windows, with flickering gleams of blades and dancing sword shadows, and blood splattered everywhere. The battlefield outside belonged to them, but the inside was truly mine. I gently caressed the silver bracelet on my wrist and my chest. It was unclear whether it was pleasure, panic, tension, or relief. I had waited for this day for too long, so long that I myself even forgot how it began and how it should end. Simultaneously with the flying daggers, the heavenly silk knot wrapped around my wrist was also unleashed. The golden crow guards behind me had their bodies separated from their heads, fresh blood splattered all over the great hall. A few insignificant soldiers were no cause for concern. Thanks to Yun Tap's command medallion, it truly cost no effort at all. Prime Minister Wang Min cried out in a hoarse voice, "You are not His Highness Prince Vin's person. Who exactly are you?" I turned back to look at him. The esteemed Prime Minister was wearing a purple gold jade tree embroidered robe, at this moment utterly terrified, but still tried to maintain the dignified bearing of one who is below one person and above 10,000 people. I couldn't help but scoff. "Who I am, you ask? Wait until you descend to the Yellow Springs, I will tell you." The fresh blood of the golden crow guards stained my white robe. I slowly walked towards him, carrying a long sword in my hand, still dripping with blood today. No one could save him. I threw the long sword to the ground, slowly drew out the heavenly silk knot, giving him no chance to struggle. I seized his head. Fresh blood gushed forth, dyeing his entire white robe red, and his corpse collapsed at the foot of the imperial throne. The autumn sunlight could not penetrate into the Taiji Hall, whose doors were closed and bolted. The cold autumn mist permeated every nook and cranny, chilling to the bone. I wonder if the Son of Heaven seated on that throne, when looking down upon his subjects, ever regretted sitting on that solitary high platform, having slaughtered all loyal ministers and good generals, only to have to endure such coldness as this? Corpses lay strewn all over the grand hall. The palace attendants cried out in panic for help, but it was to no avail, only wasting a few more live. Es. The Son of Heaven on the imperial throne, his complexion ashen like dead ashes, seemed to have aged by decades. I slowly ascended each step. Those dead eyes, not fully closed, seemed to be watching me. The pools of blood that had submerged me in countless nightmares now, beneath my feet, dyed red the thick carpet stretching along the path to the dragon throne. I bent down behind him, using the heavenly silk cord, both soft and sharp, to wrap around his neck. The supreme sovereign of the realm struggled in pain, his voice hoarse, not a trace remaining of his former imperial demeanor. I leaned close to his ear and softly whispered the words I had screamed in countless dreams. Nam Din Tuet, on behalf of the 317 departed souls of the Nam family and the 21 senior brothers of Ton Not Quan, pays respects to your majesty. The old grudge of family annihilation, today your life must pay the price. I couldn't clearly see if his eyes at that moment were of panic or fear. The heavenly silk knot in my hand suddenly tightened. It turned out that the neck of the 9-5 Supreme Being wasn't much tougher than that of an ordinary person. The palace doors burst open. General Zhenbei Xiaxiang and Prince Shenyun Kang led their troops charging in. Behind them were Prince An and Prince Yong, tightly bound, and leading them all was Crown Prince Yunyan. The head of His Majesty rolled clattering down the palace steps, coming to a perfect stop at Yunyan's feet. It was unclear whose blood had dyed the entire grand hall red. I stood on the imperial throne, supporting the still undropped body of the emperor. Fresh blood spurted out, blurring my vision. In the overwhelming sea of blood, I couldn't clearly see Yunyan's eyes. Everyone was still reeling from the sudden turn of events in the grand hall. The flying dagger in my hand shot straight towards Yunyan. Almost at the same moment, the crown prince's personal guards appeared. My flying dagger pierced through layers of guards, embedding itself between Prince An Yunju and Prince Yong Yunji. The divine mechanism battalion simultaneously fired arrows. I did not dodge at all, allowing the arrows to pierce straight into my heart. The pale autumn sunlight shone into the Taiji hall, which was filled with fresh blood. I saw Yunyan's silhouette against the light. He disregarded everyone's attempts to stop him and rushed straight towards me. I fell into his arms, as I had wished. My heart, pierced by the arrow, still beat wildly for him. A very, very long time ago, when apricot blossoms still fluttered in the March spring wind, until this very moment of ultimate despair. In his eyes was a chaotic tangle of myriad emotions. He only ceaselessly asked me why. Why? I clearly saw the crumbling expression in his eyes. Was it incomprehension? Was it heartbreak? Or was it hatred? I still couldn't possibly understand. I only wanted to use these hands stained with foul blood and human lives to touch his face, the face that even in my dreams I dared not look at again. I said, Yunyan, I give this entire realm to you, as a gift for your capping ceremony. Light and cloud shadows vanished into the endless darkness. My hands stained with crimes and fresh blood, in the end still could not touch the radiant moonlight in the depths of my heart. The 11th year of Shinkai, Tuat month, Crown Prince Yen held the capping ceremony. On the same day, Prince Yongji and Prince Anju plotted a rebellion. Prince Shinkong and General Zhenbei Xiang together suppressed them, killing the two princes in Taiji Hall. The emperor blamed himself for his lack of virtue for letting the imperial princes commit crimes, thereupon abdicated, and retired to the Purple Shrine Hall. Crown Prince Dain ascended the throne, changing the reign title to Suongben. Internally, he reformed governance. Externally, he fostered good relations with neighboring states, reduced taxes, and enabled the people to live in peace and contentment, pursuing their livelihoods, earning him widespread praise. In the same year, the retired emperor was assassinated. The emperor cleared the Nam clan of the treason case, restored their titles, and all those involved were punished, demoted, or exiled. Previously, Kai Mok, the son of Tai Fo, had joined the army, achieved meritorious service, and was granted the title of Andin Marquis. The emperor posthumously conferred the title of Empress Yuan upon the Nam clan's daughter, and bestowed the posthumous title of Jiaoxi. The following year, in the Bing month, the emperor fell gravely ill and passed away in Jian Nam Palace. The sky poured rain and snow, and his posthumous title was Jingzhou. Prince Kang ascended the throne, changed the reign title to Hun Tui, and was known as Emperor Wenmu. In the third year of Hun Tui, a woodcutter felling trees on Mount Jiuhua got lost in an apricot blossom forest. Deep in the forest, the blossoms were like snow. He was bewildered and lost his way when he suddenly saw a person standing opposite a solitary grave, with no characters on the tombstone. Astonished, he asked, "Whom are you offering sacrifices to?" The person replied, "My wife, Neep Neep." He asked again, "Why are there no characters on the tombstone?" Smiling, the person replied, "She is buried beneath the yellow springs. I remain in the human world. Separated by yin and yang, we grow old together. What need is there for brush and ink to engrave it? The characters are already deeply etched in my heart." The woodcutter considered him madly devoted, and facing the flowers and wine, got drunk and lay down in the forest. The next day, waking up, it turned out he had slept on a rock in the mountains, and he suddenly remembered yesterday's events, which seemed like a dream. He laughed and talked with the shepherd boy, then thumped his chest and sighed. The yellow millet dream, not trustworthy after all. In the world samsara, how many truly understand the tea? Ruth? In the world samsara, the foolish mistake it for reality. Nuwa Mountain Annals records of strange tales from the state of Qi. Chapter 20 Side Story 1 Van Tu Kai. When he met her at Prince An's Manor's night banquet, the bright moon shone resplendently, and plum blossoms fluttered down like snowflakes. She wore a white gown, dancing gracefully among the dancers like a solitary crane separated from its flock. After she removed her veil, her beauty, capable of toppling kingdoms and cities, was revealed, but he only paid attention to the tiny, vibrant vermilion mole on her cheek. Prince An said, "This is indeed the top courtesan, Sun Gamti." Before entering the banquet, a flustered palace attendant bumped into the crown prince's carriage, dropping a list of dancers. On it, the top courtesan Sun Gamti was circled with red ink, and she was the daughter of the disgraced minister, the former prefect of Wu County, Su Duyet Fong. 4 years ago, the Su family was implicated in Chancellor Nam's treason case, and Sun Gamti was sent to the Imperial Entertainment Bureau. The beauty was like jade, her dance was dazzling, and the young masters at the banquet competed to bestow rewards. She stepped forward to express her gratitude. Moonlight sparkled in her eyes, and her flushed cheeks made people feel stirred just by looking. He lifted her chin, a glistening tear fell onto his fingertip, and he asked, "Why does the beauty shed tears?" She replied, "Having met a noble gentleman, why? Old I not be happy?" Everyone at the banquet gasped, and the drunken young masters all laughed loudly, praising the crown prince's unparalleled demeanor that made countless beauties lose their hearts. He looked at her, his eyes as black as the night, and asked, "Do you have a name?" She lowered her eyes and replied, "My status is humble, I dare not utter my name." He looked at the bright moonlight outside the courtyard, plum blossoms blooming amidst flying snow, like a flame burning brightly in his heart. He said, "Wind sways branches, plum blossoms fly like snow, frost forms patterns. It's rare for snow to fall in the courtyard and to have a beauty dance along. If you have no name, then I shall bestow upon you the character Tuet Snow. Are you willing to follow me into the Eastern Palace?" She raised her eyes to look at him. In her eyes there was no joy or worry, but a steadfastness that made him feel familiar, and her voice was without the slightest hesitation. "Tuet Ko, I am willing." A person who is both intelligent and courageous, although difficult to control, if one knows how to use them, will achieve manifold effectiveness. Tuet Ko was exactly like that to him. She followed him into the Eastern Palace, becoming the most favored bewitching concubine. Tuet Ko, bearing the title of bewitching concubine, she rectified the inner palace on his behalf, finding every way to make him trust her. He once saw her engrossed in reading the tale of the demonic concubine, saw her haughtily instructing and punishing palace servants who made mistakes, saw her carrying Dai climbing all over the flowering trees in Lingbo Garden, saw her sitting under the shade of the flowers playing with Dai, and saw her easily catching Dai when it fell from a tree. She truly wasn't like it at all. Despite having clearly read the tale of the demonic concubine for so long, apart from a face that could be called enchantingly demonic, she wasn't like a demonic concubine in any way. What demonic concubine is born with such divine strength? That night, she accidentally learned the secret of Jiaolong Palace. He had originally intended to eliminate her, but she killed the palace maid planted by Prince In, not hesitating to reveal an old scar to show her loyalty, and begged him to spare her life. Her story was also like her, half true, half false. He originally did not believe her, but on her face was a vermilion mole identical to hers, and even her defiant gaze was an exact likeness of hers. In the end, he still couldn't bring himself to kill her, merely ordering Mu Qi and the hidden guards to guard her more strictly. Afterward, indeed, she did not reveal a single word. The hidden guards reported daily that she was still defiant in the Eastern Palace, and while she had many pleasures, ever since learning the secret of Jiaolong Palace, her greatest pleasure was to use it to threaten and tease Mu Qi. This secret, if she told the mastermind, would cause heavy losses to both the Chui clan and the Eastern Palace, and for her, it would be a great merit, yet she used it to tease Mu Qi. That was the first time he felt he didn't understand her. Only later did he realize, as it turned out, he understood nothing at all. He exploited her to relay messages to the mastermind, and also knew that her firm resolve to accompany him to Hokuok Temple was to prevent him from going to Jiangnan. He had originally not intended to go to Jiangnan himself, considering it was a gesture of respect for her. But he hadn't expected that she would truly transcribe Buddhist scriptures with him all night long, and could even risk her life to block a sword for him. She lay in his arms, unconscious, her whole body burning hot. Her wound was not severe, but her illness was very peculiar. Even the imperial physicians in the palace couldn't diagnose it. He then invited Nan Kui Han, the sect master of the poison sect from Solitary Valley, and only then did he learn that she had been afflicted by the myriad ghosts Gu, and also came to know her true identity and the truth behind this face. No wonder she could easily catch Dai Dai falling from the tree. No wonder she, injured, could roll down from a high slope and still talk and laugh naturally. No wonder when he tore his clothes to bandage her wound, she didn't cry out in pain at all, and even had the mood to tease him. Blue Netherworld, Yellow Springs heart-gouging Gu severed soft intestines myriad ghosts lair. If the pain of heart-gouging and Ling Qi could be endured, then what else could not be tolerated? The Rakshasa blade of the 12 pavilions, having crawled up from Azura hell, stepping on white bones, shedding her skin and changing her face, came to his side. She was Prince Yong's blade for seizing the throne, yet she risked her life to save him. Why? He wanted to ask her, is she in pain? Whether she was Shui Ji, Su Inshur, or the Rakshasa blade. On the Mid-Autumn Festival night, he pretended to be drunk, confided in her, and seized the opportunity to reveal to her the news that the Duke of Jinhua was gravely ill. Under the moonlight, she painted for him a peaceful, happy future. At that moment, he truly wanted to ask her, why couldn't the soulmate by his side be her? He used 10 years of his lifespan to exchange for the antidote to the 10,000 ghost Gu from Yan Gue Hang, and gave it to her before the night of the capping ceremony. He wanted to return her freedom to her before the storms descended. The first half of her life had been controlled by others, her body not her own. He could not selfishly keep her by his side, compelling her unfairly for both of them. He said that mountains and rivers separated them, but she said, 1,000 li, I will go with you. Therefore, he somewhat optimistically thought, if it wasn't said that they would never meet again, then surely there would be a day for reunion? If at that time, he could let go of the stubborn attachment in his heart, meeting again amidst the bustling Mortal world, it might well be a fortunate thing. But, while he was still clinging to this last bit of hope, she reappeared amidst the chaos of the accession ceremony, with the identity of the Rakshasa blade of the 12 towers, bathing Taiji Hall in blood and even killing the emperor. Her flying daggers killed Prince An and Prince Yong, yet she failed to evade the arrows of the imperial guards. If she had wanted to escape, how could she have known he wouldn't let her go? But she chose death in a rain of arrows, dying before his very eyes. Why? She called him Yun Yen, as if a burden had been lifted, and she said she was giving him this entire world as a coronation gift. But what talent or virtue did he possess that would make her willingly bear the burden of a multitude of sins, even sacrificing herself for him to pave his path to the throne? He thought for a long time but still didn't understand. Then Mu Qi came to find him, carrying 3 blood-written letters confessing crimes. The Minister of War, Wang Guanjin, the Minister of Personnel, Han Yi, and the Vice Minister of Works, Han Jiwei, had, before their deaths, written blood letters, confessing that 4 years ago they had colluded with the former General of Western Pacification, Zhao Ying, falsely accused Prime Minister Nan and the Grand Tutor, forced the Crown Prince into rebellion, and, to completely eradicate them, set fire to Qingyi Pass. The blood letters, self-confessed, expressed tearful apologies. Mu Qi said. Someone had placed these 3 blood letters in his room. Mu Qi knew who had killed the 3 men. Wang Guanjin and naturally also guessed who had placed the blood letters in his room, but he didn't understand why she would do such a thing. Mu Qi tremblingly held the blood letter. It seemed that a long time ago, when he heard the news that the Nan clan had been wiped out, he couldn't control himself like this either. He asked Yunyan, "Your Highness, Shuiji." "No, Su Inshur." "Rakshasa Blade. Who is she? Who exactly is she?" Countless memories in his mind were tangled like a skein of silk. The answer was right before his eyes, making his head pound as if struck by a hammer, and his heart felt as if it were being sliced into 1,000 pieces. He spent the whole night going to Hugua Temple, searching among the consecrated Buddhist scriptures, and found the volume of scripture she had copied that night. The entire volume was in Kai script, upright and meticulous, every stroke copying the Shurangama Sutra, but at the end, it was in a free, elegant, and handsome running script, writing. Gingzi, 6th month, night rain. Remembering with eternal longing, wishing for everlasting blessings. Nian respectfully penned this. Nian respectfully penned this. Holding the Buddhist scripture, he stood at the feet of the compassionate Buddha, the elegant young master appearing as if driven mad, simultaneously crying and laughing. The handwriting was blurred, stained with streaks of ink, lick. Someone's forgotten memory, deeply etched in the heart but making it impossible for people to see clearly. How could she be her? How could she possibly be her? Nian had been frail since childhood, although she was raised by the imperial tutor and everyone at Qingyi Abbey into a little demon queen. She couldn't even tie up a chicken. Yet she possessed formidable martial arts, could fight 100 people alone, had an agile figure, and possessed innate divine strength. Nian disliked sweets and savory food, whereas she loved the pastries from Luosi shop the most and wouldn't eat without meat. Nian would break out in rashes all over her body if she ate shrimp or fish, whereas she had no dietary restrictions. Nian was afraid of snakes and spiders, whereas she feared neither snakes, centipedes, nor venomous insects. Aside from the fresh, blood-red mole on her cheek, she and that other her had nothing in common, yet they were one and the same person. For 4 years, while everyone, including him, believed she had died in the sea of flames at Ta Not Pass, she, alone, stepped into Azura Hell. She transformed herself from a young Taoist nun whom even birds wouldn't bear to harm, into a human-killing blade, one whom gods would not tolerate, and Buddhas would not forgive. She changed her skin and altered her face, destroyed herself, and thoroughly transformed into another person. She was such a weak person, afraid of pain. How could she withstand the blades and swords? Azura Hell, how could she endure wounds all over her body? How could she survive from within the sea of people hacking and killing, and step by step walk out of Azura Hell, filled with bones? The blades and swords that had once slashed her body, the ancient poisons that had once tortured her, the medicines that peeled off her skin and replaced her bones, the 1,030 knife cuts to change her appearance, at this very moment, one blade at a time, they were flaying his bones and carving his flesh, a pain that made him not want to live. He confined himself in the Buddha Hall for 5 days. No one dared to enter. 5 days later, Wu Huan, holding a brocade box, stood outside the door requesting an audience. Wu Huan said, the obsession that she had wanted him to preserve, now the time had come to return it to him. Sunlight shone into the brocade box, and the sentiments that once had to be hidden in the dark finally saw the light. Inside the brocade box was a perfectly undamaged golden phoenix hairpin, which was once the betrothal gift the late Empress, on behalf of the Crown Prince, bestowed upon the legitimate daughter of the Nam family, the Xia family. He suddenly remembered the day they were attacked by assassins. He and she had fallen down a cliff together. She was in pain all over her body but refused to sleep. He knew she was afraid that in a dazed state she would say things she shouldn't, so he had to pretend to sleep first. She curled up in his arms, finally, feeling relieved enough to fall asleep, and sure enough, she also uttered some delirious words. She hugged him, choked with sobs, repeating over and over again that she wanted to be the crown princess. She personally killed Nam Din Tuet but could not kill the heart they had long exchanged since their youth. At the bottom of the brocade box was a piece of white silk, on which, in his familiar elegant and flowing semi-cursive script, was written the last will that she could not voice. Bury me beneath spring pavilion, in the apricot blossom forest. Do not inscribe my name or surname, do not erect a tombstone. Wait until the snow melts, may the apricot blossoms, like snow, cover the sins that fill my being, redeeming this pure self. Even until her death, she refused to acknowledge her own name and surname. But when she was Nam Din Tuet, pure like an apricot flower, he had loved her when she transformed into a Rakshasa blade, slaughtering people like weeds, with bloodstains covering her hands, his heart was still stirred for her. That lifelong promise that could not be fulfilled was buried with her beneath the apricot tree when the snow melted. His staying under the tree, watching over her, could also be considered a kind of being together from dawn till dusk. Every year, when Muk Kai came to offer sacrifices, he would drink until he was completely drunk. When he was still in office, using the blood letters of the three people Von Quan Ken as evidence, he cleared the Nam Fa. Millie's name in the treason case. At that time, the legitimate son of the Nam family, Nam Kai Mok, had joined the army and gone north. Tian Shi, a person, came to poison him, but the Duke of Jinhua secretly intervened to rescue him and hide him within the army. After that, Nam Kai Mok assassinated the former general of Jinshi, Truong, who had betrayed the Nam family. He barely survived, then went into hiding, changing his name, and became Muk Kai, the prince's personal bodyguard. The legitimate daughter of the Thoi family, Thoi Lan Wai, and Nam Kai Mok were childhood sweethearts, and also had a marriage pact already made from their mother's wombs. Afterwards, the Nam family was annihilated, Nam Kai Mok fled, and Thoi Lan Wai refused to remarry. At that time, Prince Yong insisted on proposing marriage to the Thoi family. The Thoi family had no other option, so Thoi Lan Wai went to make a deal with the crown prince, voluntarily requesting to enter the Eastern Palace as a consort, forever cutting off Prince Yong's intentions, but unexpectedly met Nam Kai Mok again. This was precisely the secret of Jia Lone Palace. After he abdicated, Thoi Lan Wai also, under the guise of the empress having died of illness, is now the wife of Marquis Din. Now he and Muk Kai finally understood why her unusual behavior that night occurred. And her liking to tease Muk Kai was also just because he was the older brother whom she had lost and then found again but could not acknowledge each other. Muk Kay's longing and pain all transformed into a drunken stupor. Luckily he still had Thoi Lan Wai who could help him home. This year's death anniversary saw people coming and going. Just as Muk Kai was sent off, the new emperor was welcomed. Dan Kang had been his man from a very early age. Dan Kang's birth mother had a humble status in the palace, only the empress cared for her, offering help when she was gravely ill. At that time, Crown Prince Van Dien also never despised Van Kang because of his humble birth mother, much less did he show him special favoritism out of sympathy or pity. Van Kang and Van Dien didn't even have a deep friendship, but when trouble arose, he steadfastly chose to support the crown prince. From a young age, he knew that the emperor was wary of the military power in the hands of the Duke of Jinhua, and thus disliked the empress, and also disliked the crown prince. But he always believed that as long as he didn't associate closely with the empress' maternal relatives, serving day and night as a loyal crown prince, the emperor would eventually recognize his true devotion. But human greed, when holding the supreme position above 10,000 people, could only ceaselessly expand, never be suppressed or eradicated. In a single night, Xie Jun died in battle, the Nan clan was annihilated, and the empress passed away. He finally understood that his weak forbearance fundamentally could not salvage the emperor's biased favor, and he could only lose all the people he cared about. From that moment, he began to lay out this game of life and death. He had long known that Han Di embezzled funds for repairing the Jiangling dike, and that if continuous summer rains came, the dike would surely break, and floodwaters would spread rampantly. He needed this opportunity but could not sacrifice the common people, so he had early on ordered Prince Yunju to Shuzhou. Prince An's birth mother was a woman of the Xia clan, and therefore had always been treated coldly and with suspicion by the emperor, so Yunju had no choice but to conceal his talents and act as a dissolute prince. He used the pretext of touring in early spring to go to Shuzhou, ostensibly for sightseeing, but in reality covertly constructed dikes and dams, dug canals and ditches, and at the same time evacuated the populace before the Lanjiang dike broke. The first prince had originally gone to thoroughly investigate Handi, but the one who truly brought back witnesses and physical evidence was Prince Yunju. As for Yun Kang's so-called dike repair, it was merely to conceal the fact that the Dingbei army had cleared the waterway between Lanjiang and Lanling. The Sun family spending money on food to aid disaster victims was true, but those laborers were all Dinbak army personnel disguised among them. After the waterways opened up, the main army divided into groups, advancing directly from Shuzhou to Zixindu. Zixindu was the territory of the Lanling Xiao family Xiaoning, the legitimate daughter of the Xiao family, was once the wife of Grand Tutor Nanzai although she died young due to illness. The two families were related by marriage. The grandson whom Dukan, Xiao Mingchong, cherished like a jewel, died young in a sea of fire and poison. From then on, the Xiao family pledged allegiance to the crown prince. 10,000 Dinbak troops were hidden in Lanling on the day of the capping ceremony. Under the leadership of Xie Xiang, the general of the left and right, they besieged 30,000 capital guards outside Xinjing, preventing them from providing reinforcement. The matter of Xie Xiang being unpopular with the army and generals being at odds was, of course, all fake. Even her dispute with Yun Kang was merely an improvised act. Xie Xiang and Yun Kang had known each other since childhood, and their bond was deep. On that day, they were merely gathered for drinks at Luosi Tavern. When they ran into Yunji, the two of them were forced to stage a fight, which not only produced the news of Xie Xiang and Yun Kang's discord but also gave Yunji the opportunity to win over Yun Kang. Now, the world was at peace. Emperor Xingshui had just ascended the throne and was a little lonely. The empress he wished to marry was 1,000 miles away, like a hawk soaring high in the sky, unwilling to alight in a golden cage. Yun Kang became emperor, bearing the responsibility for the world, and after Duke Xingwu died of illness, Xie Xiang became the Jinbei general, defending the northern border. Although Qi and Liang currently have friendly relations and military conflicts have temporarily quieted, the northern frontier is a crucial strategic location for military strategists, and there can be no room for the slightest mistake. What's more, with Xie Xiang's personality, how could she willingly be imprisoned within the Forbidden Palace? Even if Yun Kang were to leave the empress position vacant, I fear he still wouldn't be able to wait for the phoenix to return. Ultimately, he was selfish, insisting on coming here alone to watch over a solitary grave. In the end, he had wronged Yun Kang but was helpless. Another year the snow melted as usual. He carried wine and sat alone before the nameless tombstone. Warm sunlight bathed the surroundings, apricot branches bloomed profusely with the spirit of spring, and he chattered on with her, telling stories of old friends and new events. Nan Qimu and Chui Lani recently had a pair of twins. The elder sister is named Si Shui, and the younger sister is named Mian Shui. King An has curbed his temper and proposed marriage to the Chui family's young daughter, Chui Zhui. The wedding is set for the middle of next month. Yet Emperor Hun Tui still left the empress position vacant, only appointing a few Jiaoi concubines, and was almost drowned to death by the saliva of the grand ministers demanding to establish an empress. Tan Not Daoist temple, abandoned after a fire, had been renovated, and a new Daoist priest had come to Li Di there, bringing along 3 or 5 disciples, among whom was a little Daoist girl of 6 or 7 years old, wearing white Daoist robes. She coincidentally entered his apricot blossom forest, clinging to him and demanding to learn to read and draw, calling him Tian Xin. She, just like her, liked climbing trees, hiding on the tops of trees in full bloom, revealing a segment of her snow-white Daoist robes. Suddenly, a strong wind blew from the horizon, apricot blossoms flew across the sky like snow, vaguely resembling a rootless, seedless longing, which blurred his eyes, and that white snowflake fell into his eyes. The little Daoist girl pointed at the apricot blossoms fluttering across the sky and exclaimed in surprise, "Oh, Tian Xin, look, it's so beautiful. He looked deep into the apricot forest, vaguely as if he saw someone wearing snow-white Taoist robes walking towards him from deep within the forest. Walking on and on, she transformed from a little Taoist girl into a beautiful young woman, and then from a young woman into a snow-like beauty. The cinnabar mole on her cheek shone deep red in the snowy light. It was a drop of blood in his heart, keeping him in those long, drawn-out years of longing. Apricot blossoms, like melting snow, fell on her long eyelashes, and he also smiled and said yes, it's so beautiful. Chapter 21 Side Story 2 Nam Din Snow. Spring comes to Nam Lao, the snow recedes entirely, startling the plum's promise of bloom. I was born in March, during the spring when the snow melts and apricot blossoms bloom. My paternal grandfather was Nam Baxi, the left prime minister of the reigning dynasty. My father was Nam Zhe, a grand academician of the Imperial Library, and my mother was Xiao Ning, the legitimate daughter of the Xiao clan of Lanling. My mother and Xie Zhiyun, who was already the empress, were close friends from their boudoir days. 1 month after I was born, the empress, who was pregnant, secretly came to Prime Minister Nam's residence to visit me. Out of curiosity, I touched the empress' belly, and thus Yun Yan was born. The empress said, "The crown prince came because of me, that is why I am Nam Tingxue. He also has the courtesy name Ziki." Before I was born, the empress had made a pact with my mother. If they were of the same gender, they would become sworn sisters. If they were a dragon and phoenix, a boy and a girl, they would be united in marriage. Therefore, from the moment Crown Prince Yun Yan was born, I was already the Crown Princess Consort, personally designated by the empress. Taoist master Wu Huanzi of the Qingyi Abbey once told my fortune, saying that I had a special destiny and should not be raised too comfortably. He suggested sending me to be raised in a Taoist temple, to use the qi of grand purity to break my destiny. The Nam family was entirely male, and I was their only, youngest daughter. Everyone cherished me like a precious jewel. Naturally, my paternal grandfather and parents did not agree. When I was 3 years old, my mother passed away due to illness after childbirth. The empress wanted to welcome me into the palace to raise me alongside the crown prince, but the director of the Imperial Astronomical Bureau also said my destiny was special, and I should not enter the palace to encounter the imperial aura. It was many years later that I understood the special destiny they spoke of. I'm afraid it only meant that I was inherently an unlucky person. It's just that, facing the empress, Prime Minister Nan and the grand academicians of the Imperial Secretariat, no one dared to open their mouths and state it clearly, that's all. Afterwards, when I was 5 years old, Taoist master Wu Huanzi brought me into Qingyi Temple, and my elder brother Nan Qimu, fearing I would be lonely, also joined me to live in the Taoist temple. Actually, there were many senior and junior brothers in the Taoist temple. Everyone, except for Master Wu Huanzi, treated me like a precious treasure and pampered me, so life was even more carefree than at the Prime Minister's residence. All day long I climbed trees and teased birds, gradually growing from a proud and noble young lady of the Prime Minister's residence into a mischievous devil king who brought chaos. Even gods and ghosts would have to worry. Qingyi Temple was located on Mount Jiuhua in the outskirts of Xinjing. My grandfather and father would come to visit me as soon as court was dismissed, and the empress would also occasionally sneak a visit. It was just that every time she was very worried, saying the emperor all day only saw the crown prince reading, and feared the crown prince would become a bookish simpleton just like the grand tutor. The grand tutor at that time was Grand Mentor Qin Xian, nearly 60 years old, whose every word revolved around the sage Mencius, full of pedantic classical pronouncements, so the empress' worry was not without reason. The empress held my hand, tears and snot streaming profusely, saying neep neep, if Ziqi later grows up to be a bookish simpleton who doesn't understand romance, you absolutely must not despise him. I was still young, naturally not understanding these words, only looking in surprise at the empress holding my hand and sighing, marveling at how beautiful the empress was. I thought, would that crown prince husband of mine, whom I hadn't met yet, also be very handsome? After that, Qin Xian retired. The crown prince acknowledged Grand Academician Nanzai of the palace hall as his teacher. My father became the grand tutor, and my elder brother also entered the Eastern Palace to be a study companion. Grand Tutor Nanze requested 7 days off each month to go to Qingyi Temple to visit his daughter. Everyone knew about this, but the crown prince could not go a single day without a teacher, so with the empress' permission, the crown prince followed the grand tutor to Qingyi Temple. When I was 7 years old, I met Crown Prince Yunyan, who had followed my father to Qi Jai Temple. At that time I was lying basking in the sun on an apricot tree blooming profusely like snow. My snow-white Taoist robe blended in with the color of the flowers, making it hard to distinguish. The crown prince entered from outside the gate without anyone announcing him. He also had a youthful disposition, stood on tiptoes to break an apricot branch, but accidentally pulled my snow-white Taoist robe. I was pulled down from the tree by him, turned around and fell into his arms, pressing him down onto the ground. A group of palace attendants fearfully chased after me. My father, Grand Tutor Nam Trake, was sitting leisurely on a Grand Tutor's chair in front of the window. He pushed away the page of the book covering his face to look, then continued to close his eyes and rest. A group of palace attendants surrounded me and Van Dyne. Both the Grand Tutor and the Crown Prince remained silent, and no one dared to move. Apricot blossoms flew scattered like late spring snow, falling lightly on the Crown Prince's black hair. I asked him, "Are you indeed Crown Prince Tu Kai? My husband?" My Crown Prince husband was as beautiful as jade. He furrowed his brows and thought for a moment, then also asked me, "Are you Neep Neep?" Neep Neep is my childhood name after my mother passed away, only the Empress frequently called me that. I lay sprawled on the Crown Prince with no intention of getting down. He was indeed like the Empress, having grown up very beautiful. The more I looked, the more I liked him, and I couldn't resist kissing Van Dyne's cheek. A group of palace attendants exchanged bewildered glances. My father peeked through the gap of the book page, then immediately used the book to cover his face, pretending not to see. The Crown Prince's jade-like face flushed red, like an evening cloud. He sternly said to me, "Men and women should not touch each other intimately. Even if you and I have an engagement, before the ceremony, we cannot exceed the proper bounds." I looked at the red-faced, stern Crown Prince and couldn't help but think, the Empress was not wrong. The Crown Prince was indeed a bookworm who didn't understand romance. But, what exactly does "doesn't understand romance" mean? Little Crown Prince Yunyan, whom I had treated impudently, followed his father to live in Qingyi Abbey. When he sat upright reading the Rites of Zhou by the window, I was sunbathing on the apricot tree outside the window. When he practiced calligraphy on the blue stone slab in the courtyard, I was catching crickets in the grass patch outside the door. When he recited the Analects late at night, I was under the corridor playing fighting grass with a group of senior brothers. Then one day, I was climbing a tall pagoda tree outside the courtyard, carefully returning a bird's nest that had been blown down by the wind and rain back to its branch. Separated by the high courtyard wall, Yunyan sat upright reading a book in the sparse shade of apricot blossoms. He looked up at me from beyond the wall, his expression very tense, and said, "Nyan, come down quickly, it's dangerous up there." He was worried about me. The pale sunlight fell on his slightly furrowed brow. Yunyan's appearance, even when frowning, was also very beautiful. I waved my hand at him and said, "Crown Prince husband, I'm scared, can you come and get me down?" Of course I was tricking him. I had climbed this old pagoda tree no less than 100 times and would not be scared. But Yunyan believed it. He disregarded the etiquette of a gentleman and the demeanor of a crown prince, and climbed the old pagoda tree for me. I smiled with narrowed eyes and showed him the lucky surviving chick. The chick had just grown thick downy feathers and its chirps were weak. Yunyan knew I was tricking him but wasn't angry. Amidst the budding purple pagoda tree, his face was full of smiles like warm sunlight. Later on, I took him climbing trees, wading rivers, teasing birds, and catching fish, ultimately living up to the Empress' entrustment by raising the Crown Prince to become the little follower of a troublemaking demon king. Beneath an outwardly decorous and proper, almost divine appearance, he hid a heart that wandered freely through the southern mountains, as carefree and unrestrained as a great wind. Many years later, every time my father came to visit me at Ton Not Abbey, Van Dyne always followed behind. He and the Empress were alike, possessing the most gentle and amorous eyes in this world, yes, that had once gazed at me for a very long time, throughout every day's comings and goings at Ton Not Abbey. and amidst the bustling human world smoke and fire of thin kin. The year I came of age, Van Dyne took me to sightsee the prosperous Lantern Festival of Thin Kin. I stayed in the Taoist Abbey all year round, only returning home to stay temporarily during festivals. On the Lantern Festival day in Thin Kin, lanterns and torches shone brightly, and the Chi River was filled with floating lanterns, like the Milky Way descending into the human world. Amidst the brilliant fireworks filling the sky, I told Van Dyne that my master had divined an auspicious day for me, and that waiting until the 9th day of the 6th month to perform my coming-of-age ceremony, I would be able to stay in Thin Kin permanently, and be able to see him for a long time. The fireworks shone into his eyes, bright like the stars in the sky, and on the crowded street, he silently held my hand and said to me, "Then I will go and request an imperial decree, asking Imperial Father to bestow the betrothal gifts, and on the day of your coming of age, formally confer Nyen Nyen as Crown Princess, so from then on, we will be together morning and night, never to be separated." Behind him was a brilliant fireworks display, its light shining far and wide, and he looked into my eyes so brightly. This young master and this human world smoke and fire were all as beautiful as a dream. Many years later, this beautiful dream had accompanied me through every difficult dark night, every fierce battle to the death. When I finally survived by clinging to a thread of life, I then discovered that dream had shattered long ago. But at that time I, however, did not know, and wholeheartedly waited for the capping ceremony to get married, waited to become the crown princess of Van Dyne. After the Lantern Festival, Shan City reported an urgent situation, and General Xia led the army to set out on an expedition. Both court affairs and the war were urgent, and grandfather and father, even Crown Prince Van Dyne, were too busy to divide their time. I was in the Qingyi Temple, separated from the outside world, waiting anxiously. When the apricot blossoms bloomed profusely, I received a golden phoenix hairpin that Van Dyne sent someone to deliver. This was the betrothal gift for the Xia family that the Empress delivered on Van Dyne's behalf. He instructed me not to worry, saying that His Majesty had agreed, and that an imperial edict of enfeoffment would be issued once the war here concluded. I rested assured, waiting in Qingyi Temple. The apricot blossoms withered, the peach blossoms bloomed profusely, and after waiting for spring to pass and summer to arrive, I still did not meet Van Dyne. Then one day, at night, Master woke me, saying that it was a night for observing celestial phenomena, and that an auspicious sign had descended upon the southeast, requiring me to personally go to Bigua Lake on Shan, south of the Tsangjiang River, to seclude myself for 3 months, drink wind and morning dew, and break a special fate. Otherwise, it will be impossible to perform the coming-of-age ceremony. I heard him speak as if through a fog, looked up at the pitch-black night outside the window, and thought the old man was talking in his sleep. But he had already packed my luggage, and also told my eldest senior brother to accompany me and depart immediately, also saying that he had informed my grandfather and father. I yawned widely, and before I even had time to think clearly, I was pulled out the door by my eldest senior brother, dazed and confused, running towards Gisun. The carriage traveled for 3 days through desolate mountains and forests. Then my eldest senior brother said he had to go back for a trip, telling me to go on ahead by myself and not to look back. He said he would come back to find me, no matter how far. After that, he never came back again, nor did I reach Gisun. In the dead of night, I secretly returned to Nan Prime Minister's residence. The once magnificent residence had become a desolate and ruined building. Everywhere was a chaotic scene after the imperial soldiers' search. The library pavilion, which my grandfather and father considered a treasure, had been burned to ashes, and the ink-wash painting screen and the 7-stringed zither my mother loved, kept in her room, had also all been destroyed. The vast Nam residence was devoid of any human presence, resembling a cold, desolate tomb. On the first day I departed from Tawny Pass, I had pondered carefully. Biwu Pond, where my master had told me to go, was the territory of the Lan Ling Shao clan. He hadn't told me to enter reclusive cultivation. It was clear he was telling me to seek refuge. I knew that something must have definitely happened at the Nam residence. If I had gone, perhaps I might still have been able to protect my master and all my senior brothers at Tawny Pass. Furthermore, my maternal grandfather was still alive. He would surely be able to think of a way to save my father and grandfather. But it was only after entering the city that I learned that Prime Minister Nam and the Grand Tutor, accused of treasonous intent, had all their property confiscated, their entire family imprisoned, and were scheduled for execution by beheading the day after tomorrow. Ta Not Monastery concealed the Nam household's daughter implicated in a crime on the night of the fire. Nam Din Tuet and everyone at Ta Not Monastery perished in the sea of flames, and the legitimate son of the Nam household, Nam Kai Mok, who had enlisted to fight in the war, was granted poisoned wine. And the senior disciple, who merely wanted to return to collect the remains of his master and martial brothers, was instead hunted down, captured by government soldiers, and executed. On the day the Nam clan was executed, I cut my hair and disfigured my face, standing amidst the bustle. Noisy crowd, watching the Meridian Gate platform where blood flowed like a river. Snow-like blossoms drifted across the sky, sending off this centuries-old noble clan of pure prestige on their final journey. I couldn't help but think, grandfather feared pain the most. How could he endure this pain of his head separating from his neck? Father was dashing and carefree, only enjoying the company of wine. I wonder if anyone warmed wine to send him off before he departed? And my elder brother, who went north to join the army, wholeheartedly devoted to serving the country, would he be content with such an outcome? In just one night, I lost all my loved ones, and from now on, I was left utterly alone in this world. I couldn't meet Van Dyne. General Xia Quan of Jinbei went missing during the campaign, suspected of treason and defecting to the enemy. The emperor was furious, and the entire Xia family was arrested and imprisoned, awaiting trial. The crown prince submitted a memorial pleading for mercy but incurred the emperor's displeasure, and was placed under house arrest at Zongjing Temple. The emperor even wanted to depose the empress and the crown prince. The ministers led by Prime Minister Nan opposed the deposition of the empress, arguing that the empress was blameless, while the Eastern Palace officials led by the Grand Tutor opposed the emperor deposing the crown prince. Fortunately, Prime Minister Nan's numerous followers barely managed to preserve Van Dyne's position as Crown Prince. But now, Prime Minister Nan and the Grand Tutor have been convicted of treason, the entire Nan family has been annihilated, the Xie family is still struggling to save themselves, and my only hope is that Van Dyne can survive. I took the pair of gilded phoenix and dragon hairpins that Van Dyne gave me and buried them under the old apricot tree that had attained sentience in front of my father's room, after which I sold myself to the 12 Pavilion, famous in the martial arts world. The 12 Pavilion only trains in blade-wielding to kill, and does not inquire about past grievances. I could not save the entire Nam family, could not save Tan Not Monastery, and even less could I save Yun Yen and the Empress. The only thing I could do was avenge them, and the 12 Towers was the only path I could think of. Master Jiaolu said, "A good killing blade is not about how sharp it is, but about how much resentment and killing intent it possesses. Therefore, I will be a good blade." The Azure Purgatory of the 12 Towers opens once every 4 years. 100 people enter, all of whom are martial arts prodigies with superb innate aptitude. 4 years later, only one person can survive and emerge. I was born prematurely, so I was frail and weak from a young age. Compared to the other youths who entered the Azure Purgatory with me, I inherently had no advantages whatsoever, but 4 years later, I was the only one to walk out of the Azure Purgatory. I trampled upon layers of bones, my hands stained with fresh blood, as I crawled out of Azure Hell, not knowing if what survived was a human, or that heart of revenge and retribution, or the incessant, undying longing buried deep within my heart. Amidst the endless slaughter and boundless suffering, I dreamt more than once of the young man reading under the shade of apricot blossoms, dreamt of him treading on the vast moonlight as he walked towards me, saying he wanted to take me home. Just like a very long time ago, when I was lost in the darkness, at a loss, he walked towards me with a lantern in the moonlight, saying that in the future, no matter how far I strayed, he would come find me and take me home. He also said he would plant the back mountain full of apricot trees for me, so the apricot blossoms would be like snow, and if I got lost, I would just need to sit on a flower tree, and I would no longer be afraid. The young man in my dream had gentle, affectionate eyes at that very moment. The sparkling Milky Way was no longer in the sky but in my heart. But after waking from the dream, there was no gentle young man, nor were there apricot blossoms like snow, only I was lost, having forgotten the way back. For years ago, Nam Din Tuet died in the sea of fire of Tan Not Monastery. 4 years later, Nam Din Tuet died in azure purgatory, and the survivor was the Rakshasa blade of the 12 pavilions. Before leaving my master, I found a way to leak information to the 5th Prince Van Tap, and finally chose him from among the buyers. He ordered me to become a secret agent, infiltrate the Eastern Palace, secretly transmit information, and wait for the opportune moment to act. Assassins of the 12 pavilions could all make one request before leaving their master, and I had wanted a flawless, peerless bowtie skin. My appearance had been ruined on the night before my sect was annihilated. 4 years of slaughter had left countless ugly, twisted scars on my body. I needed a flawless, exquisite bowtie skin to go face a game of chess that would surely lead to death. Before changing my appearance and skin, the thousand-faced saintly hand, Nan Goe Tu, asked if there was anything I wanted to keep. I kept the small cinnabar mole on my cheek. That was the last thing that belonged to Nam Din Tuet. After 4 years of separation, I finally got to meet him again. The youth of yesteryear was right before my eyes, yet it was as if mountains and rivers separated us, even more distant than the 4 arduous years. He sat alone on high, his attire magnificent, amidst songs and dances of peace and prosperity, yet not a single ray of light could penetrate his eyes. He was still as gentle and warm as jade, yet cold and distant. He transformed from the gentle and courteous youth Zi Qi into the unfathomable crown prince Yun Yen, while I transformed from the little Taoist nun Yan Ye into a murderous Rakshasa blade. It turns out that in the end, none of us were lucky enough. To escape all had changed our forms and natures. I used the identity of Su Insher and the cinnabar mole of Nanting Xue, as I wished, to make Yun Yen notice. At the moment he bestowed upon me the name Xue, I felt no joy or fortune because he still always remembered Nanting Xue. I'd rather he completely forgot Nanting Xue. I'd rather Nanting Xue died forever in his heart on that summer day 4 years ago, thickly covered in flowers. His true affection only caused me more suffering. Because I knew, he and I would eventually walk on 2 different paths. In fact, Yun Yen had never trusted me, nor had I ever thought of gaining his trust. I impersonated Tin Gamdoi, not to gain Van Dyne's trust, but to make Van Tap believe that I had, as he wished, infiltrated the Eastern Palace. Van Dyne kept me to exploit me, to feign weakness to the Emperor, and even more so, to use his own scheme against him to transmit information to Van Tap. From beginning to end, Van Dyne and I both aimed for the same outcome, just choosing 2 completely opposite paths. The days spent in the Eastern Palace, I felt as if I had returned to a past where I had never gone astray. I liked listening to him recount old stories that had long been forgotten, listening to him say he had stolen the jar of apricot blossom wine I buried at Ton Not Pass, listening to him say he wanted to bring the marriage proposal letter as a gift when I came of age. But the person he admired from his youth was Nam Din Tuet, pure as an apricot blossom, not a Rakshasa blade whose hands were stained with blood. I killed those who had harmed the Nam clan on charges of treason, forcing them before death to kneel and write blood letters admitting their guilt, and repent to all the innocent wronged souls who were implicated. For revenge, I fell into hell, my body filled with murderous karma, unworthy of the title of a prestigious aristocratic family, pure for 100 generations, but I could still accompany him in this life and death chess game. Since childhood, Yun Yen has followed his father, learning the way of kingship and the etiquette of a gentleman. Even if he is ultimately forced, against his will, to compel the king to abdicate, he still would not commit regicide or fratricide, but I can. The Rakshasa blade of the 12 towers will eliminate all calamities for him and restore a peaceful realm to him. He is the bright pearl of the Xia clan and also the bright pearl in my heart. I am willing to become a great wind, a wind that extinguishes the candle, to return the bright pearl to the sovereign. I once thought that in this life, before turning 15, I would be the cherished young daughter of the Nam family, a carefree young Taoist girl, and after turning 15, I would be Yun Yan's wife. Whether I would later be a crown princess or empress was unimportant to me, as Yun Yan also did not wish to be crown prince or emperor. It was simply that he was born into a high position, and this was his response. ability. And I only wished to be by his side for a long time, just like all ordinary couples in the world, holding hands and walking through life until the very end. Only, I never expected that I would transform from a young Taoist girl into a murderous blade, and Nam Din Tuet would transform into the Rakshasa master. The long, ordinary life that I once envisioned had ended in the 5th month of the 7th year of Shinkai. He and I were companions for 8 years, lost each other for 4 years, reunited when the snow melted, and said our final farewell in September of the 11th year of Shinkai. I could not fulfill our youthful promise to be with him day and night until the end of our lives. I could only bestow upon him the supreme imperial throne, so that he could become a monarch reigning over all under heaven, no longer compelled to lose anything. The end. You have just finished listening to the series The Demon Consort's Cultivation Manual. Thank you for accompanying us throughout this journey. If you enjoyed this story of power and cultivation, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment about your favorite moment. See you in the next adventure.